million more households set to get support with their energy bills next winter. Those proposals would expand the warm home discount, offering £150 to 2.7 million extra homes, including nearly a million with children. The government says the plans will ease the impact of gas price spikes and is also working with Ofgem on a potential debt relief scheme. Well, the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, says expanding the discount will help protect millions of families. But the Deputy Leader of the Lib Dems, Daisy Cooper, says vulnerable households can't afford to wait until next winter.
The government should scrap the energy price bill increase for the almost 10 million pensioners who have had their winter fuel payments taken away. We know from our own research that 9 in 10 people who are worried about energy bills have already changed their behaviour to try and keep their heating costs down. And now people are choosing between heating and eating. So we want the government to take action, not next winter, but right now.
The National Farmers Union is calling for urgent action on what they call the family farm tax, warning that it puts elderly farmers at an impossible position. The president of the NFU, Tom Bradshaw, told the conference that the government had broken its promise by introducing inheritance tax on farming businesses. Well, the Environment Secretary said in response that there is new support for farmers, including a 5-year extension to the seasonal workers scheme. But Steve Reid was briefly interrupted by a silent protest at the conference as he told the room he would always show up for difficult conversations. And police will no longer need a warrant to search a property for a stolen phone under new crime-fighting measures. Officers will be able to act faster using phone tracking data to locate stolen goods, with the approval of a senior officer instead of a court. The government's new crime and policing bill also includes tougher knife crime laws, bans on face coverings at protests, and new powers to tackle antisocial behaviour. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says it's about taking back our streets and restoring law and order. That's the news on GB News. Do stay with us for that breaking news from the Commons in around 20 minutes' time. Now, though, let's head straight back to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 12, and do stay with us. We're going to be live with the Prime Minister in around 20 minutes' time. Could defence spending rise by a prodigious amount? And frankly, who will end up paying for it? But in the meantime, another blow to Brits today as energy bills are set to rise again, this time by more than £100 a year from April.
Oh, brilliant. Yes, during the election campaign, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, he repeatedly promised his policies would save families perhaps even £300 on their energy bills.
Only Labour offers a plan for real change to cut energy bills for good with GB Energy, our new publicly owned energy company.
Well, since he took office, however, instead of bills going down, they've gone up. There's been not one, not two, but 3 rises in the energy price cap.
Yes, today's announcement will see the energy price cap rise by 6.4%. That's 28% higher than analysts had predicted.
Well, here's how the Energy Secretary reacted to the news.
The news that energy bills are rising is going to be worrying for many families. It's happening because we're so reliant on fossil fuels, in particular gas. And the markets that determine the price of those fossil fuels are controlled by the decisions of petrostates and dictators. So we've seen a 15% rise in the price of wholesale gas. What's government going to do? We're going to have your back. We're going to expand the warm homes discount to protect vulnerable families. We're going to insulate and have energy efficiency for more homes. And we're going to ensure that the regulator is really tough with those companies so we get best value for money for consumers. And the truth is, the most important thing we can do is stick to our clean power mission. Homegrown, clean power that we control. Solar, wind, nuclear. That's the way we get off the roller coaster of fossil fuel prices. That's the way we take back control of our energy security.
OK, are you convinced?
Well, taking back control of energy security off the roller coaster of gas prices. Let's discuss it all with the Labour MP for Chesterfield, Toby Perkins. Toby, thanks for joining us. People will be worried today, worried that energy prices have shown no sign of going down, up in the last 3 assessments. I mean, it's not going well.
No, it's not. I think Ed Miliband's absolutely right to say we will constantly be in the hands of the international markets until we're more energy independent. And that's why the approach that he's taking of massively looking to increase the amount of renewable energy is absolutely the right one, because, you know, we will see increases, we will hopefully on other occasions see decreases, but what we won't see is any kind of control over it. And ultimately, we need to get energy independent, and that's the sort of...
Toby, sorry to jump in here. I think you make Ed Miliband makes a very good point about nuclear power. It's stable and consistent. We know what we're going to pay for it. That's all grand. But he's talking about the volatility of gas prices. How are renewable energy generation sites, which we all know are intermittent, you know, sometimes the wind blows, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's not. How is that intermittency in generation going to be anything other than chaotic for our prices?
Well, I mean, I think everyone recognises that there will always be some element of gas that will continue to be needed, not just up till 2050, but probably even after that. But it's about reducing the amount of that we have to use. Actually, one of the parts of the government's Clean Power 2030 programme is about massively increasing the amount of battery storage we have, because you're right that on occasions we can have a surplus of renewable energy, and sometimes we haven't got enough. So actually increasing the battery storage makes us much better able to harvest that wind and solar when it's plentiful and store it for the future. So there's a five-fold increase in the battery storage. But it's about reducing the dependence on oil and gas as we head towards complete clean power. So, you know, actually, it's a perfectly sensible approach.
Yeah, Toby, I'm just wondering if the Labour government and yourself believe that we're going to be dependent in one way or another on gas for many years to come. Why is Ed Miliband so adamant that it's the right decision to shut off exploration in this country?
Well, I mean, in terms of the gas, you know, the amount that of gas that we expect to be using by 2030 is down to around 5% of our energy mix. So it's about massively reducing that amount and actually increasing the amount of energy we generate ourselves that's produced here in the UK through wind, through solar, and through other renewable technologies.
Yeah, it's just we do have quite a lot of gas under our feet and in the North Sea still. And it's always a bad news story when the price of gas increases in the UK. You know, I'm sure you've spoken to other broadcasters today. We read in the papers. It's a bad news story. How do we manage this awful rise in the price of gas? Other countries celebrate it. The UAE celebrates it. Saudi Arabia celebrates it. Qatar celebrates it. Much of the United States celebrates it. Why? Because they're net gas exporters. The price of gas going up for those countries is a good thing.
And ultimately, it's a bad thing for the globe if we continue to be overly reliant on fossil fuels. So there's two elements to this. The first is around the price, and ultimately, if we produce gas or oil, which we produce both of those, it goes into the global marketplace. The amount of gas and oil that we produce is a relatively small amount in comparison to the global amount. So it doesn't bring down prices for consumers, us having a little bit more. But there is, of course, an economic benefit for the country if we end up selling that gas and oil. But it's far better for us to increase our independence by having more renewable, which is good for the planet, but also good for our long-term energy security.
OK, well, it's going to have to happen quite quickly because they were big, bold pledges made by Ed Miliband and the rest of the government back during the election campaign. It'd be nice to see those energy bills go down at some point. Toby Perkins, we'll have to leave it there. Labour MP for Chesterfield, appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Oh, dear.
Yeah, no, let's move on now, though, because clearly, how are the public reacting to this news? We can go live to Manchester, speak with GB News North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper, who's on the ground with, well, the people of this country. Sophie, take it away.
Good afternoon to you both. Yes, you mentioned the people there. This is something that is extremely concerning for members of the public all over the UK. Given the news this morning that our energy bills are predicted to rise, are set to rise, I should say, by around £111 every single year. So to talk a little bit about that, I'm joined now. Some of our viewers who are watching this morning might remember we spoke to landlord Cyan Astley. She's joining us, and we're also joined by one of her tenants, Beth Croft. Beth, Cyan, thank you so much for joining us. Cyan, once again. This morning we were speaking about the issues you're facing between balancing being fair to your tenants, but also you as a business owner. Beth is one of your tenants. Talk to us about that balancing act.
We make sure that we have a really good relationship with our tenants, and we want our tenants to talk to us if there's any problems in the property at all. And that's critical, I think, for the landlord-tenant relationship. And of course, when electricity prices are going up by so much, it really affects our tenants, and therefore it can really affect our properties. So Beth and I have had quite a lot of contact over this last year about this really challenging subject.
Beth, I want to bring you in now because I know this time, that last year, you were facing an issue, weren't you, with condensation in the flat, and you didn't want to put your heating on because of the cost of it, but that gave you an issue in itself, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when I first noted the condensation, I did flag it, but I didn't want to put the heating on because the bills are already so high. I started putting it on for half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening, but it just wasn't enough. And again, that means that the bills are going up more outgoings for me. So I was trying to put it off as much as possible, and then that's when the mould really started to develop. And in the end, I had to buy a dehumidifier, which in itself is a large cost. Which seems to be working okay now, but again, it's the implications of that. It's the cost of, even though it is cheap to run one, it's still the cost of running one, still having to keep the mould at bay, and it's now a matter of having to have the heating on for a much longer length of time in order to keep the building in a good condition.
Now, obviously, we've seen the news this morning that bills are rising for the third time in a row. How does that make you feel?
It's frustrating because I'm a single person, so as one person having to pay all the bills, that's a big weight on your shoulders. So it'll just mean that I'm just going to have to watch my spending elsewhere, which will mean that I won't be able to go out as much. I won't be able to go. I used to enjoy going out for meals out, which I won't be doing, which is difficult because I like giving back to independent businesses as well. So I feel like there'll be an implication from that. So quite frustrating.
Beth, Cyan, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And I think that is the real crux of the issue, Tom and Emily, isn't it? That people's lives on a day-to-day basis are going to be affected. Even though it might seem like a small amount that it's going up per month, it is going to have a knock-on effect.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Sophie. Thank you very much indeed, particularly for, yes, people who are living on their own, Tom. Yeah. You've got to pay all the bills yourself. You get a couple of little knock-off discounts sometimes. But if you're, trying to heat a whole home, it's expensive.
Thanks for rubbing it in, Emily.
Oh, sorry,
it's okay,
Tom.
you live with Patrick. No, we can
share the bills.
You can share the cost. It's just me and my Todd. Yeah. Right, I'm sure
I believe the energy bills come out of my account, actually.
You need to fix that.
There's an insight for you.
Elsewhere, the NHS England Chief Executive Amanda Pritchard is stepping down after leaving the health service through what she calls the most difficult period in its history.
Yes, she has faced some criticism from MPs in recent weeks, but she says now is the right time to leave because the NHS has moved past the pandemic and is preparing for reform. So we have our health and science editor, Lucy Johnston, here in the studio with us. Amanda was in the job for about 3.5 years, wasn't she?
That's right.
And it seems as though she had a meeting with Wes Streeting and then they agreed to part ways.
That's right, and it followed a report last month from the Public Accounts Committee, which scrutinises government spending, which was very scathing about her and her deputy and said that they lacked the dynamism and were too complacent to lead the reforms that Wes Streeting wants to bring in. But we've had a look. Some experts at Oxford University have been looking at NHS England, which was set up a decade ago to lead the NHS, and it's actually looks like it's spending an awful lot of money which could be diverted to frontline, to doctors and nurses, what we, that we need. So her salary was about £330,000 a year with pension contributions. Nice. The NHS England employs about 15,000 staff, roughly about that. And what doctors are saying is that actually there's a lot of money going on this whole bureaucracy to lead the NHS. It's a huge waste. We're spending 10% of our public purse on the NHS. It's up to 190 billion this year, and it seems to me that maybe, just shifting the sort of deck chairs on the boat aren't really going to change things.
So this could actually point to serious reform, perhaps more wide-ranging reform than a lot of people had suspected. Might we see the abolition of NHS England as this overarching body, or at least one that's a lot smaller than 15,000 people?
No, I don't think so at all. She's being replaced by someone else who was a former accountant, another pen-pushing, another accountant. I think we spend £1 in every 100 on financiers in the NHS. It's a huge amount of money. No, that's not going anywhere. The government reforms are about doing prevention instead of treatment, community instead of hospital, analogue, digital instead of analogue. Yeah. All these things are very good ideas. They've been said before. We've said them a lot. But it actually needs people on the ground. It needs doctors and people at the front line to really push these things through.
And if Wes Streeting is going to achieve what he wants to, he probably needs a radical in that position rather than someone that's happy to sort of go with things as they are. Lucy Johnston, thank you very much indeed, our health and science editor. We'll bring you more on that story because it could have huge repercussions for our healthcare.
Certainly could, but do stay with us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Plenty more to come. We're expecting that statement from the Prime Minister in the next 10 minutes. Rumours are swirling that he could be slashing foreign aid spending. It'll be interesting if that comes from a Labour Prime Minister. But before then, we're also going to hear from the President of the National Farmers Union. It's a jam-packed show. Don't miss any of it.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
A woman of 53 has believed for 18 months she was in an online relationship with Brad Pitt.
I think we're seeing pictures. So these are the pictures that she received that made her believe that she was in this relationship with Brad Pitt.
And you'll see that some of it is in hospital because the scammer was claiming that he was suffering from cancer. This was playing very much on her emotion. So this is a divorcee who lived in Mauritius. She'd received a £700,000 divorce settlement, or £650,000 divorce settlement, I should say, and £700,000 has been taken from her through this scam.
Yeah.
As she was becoming, every time she became suspicious, the money was taken for payment of charges on gifts that she never received, and then hospital fees. There was lots of emotions being played into there. Now, as somebody, I'm a rom-com writer by trade, so I write romantic fiction. One of the books I've written has actually been about somebody who did online dating, got herself into a whole heap of trouble. Not quite, she wasn't in a relationship with Brad Pitt, but she met somebody dodgy. So because I've written that book, I've met a lot of people who've come up to me and said, oh, it's happened to me.
It's scary in this digital age, isn't it?
They've lost £700,000, but somebody has tried it on. Somebody my question is, would a man go 18 months in a relationship online without seeing somebody and keep it going? Or is this feeding into this neediness of a particular demographic of a woman who that's better than anything else she got going on in her life, was what was being fed to her over the internet? I just
and then maybe a little bit of her knew, but she kind of just suppressed it because she
was hoping it was Brad Pitt.
Her daughter apparently for a year was saying this can't be true. Come on, think about it. But she just fell for it. But I just wonder, what's right? It's a very sad story. She's obviously now getting a lot of hate and ridicule as well.
She's been on French TV. And she's had a huge amount of pushback from it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Ellie Costello, and thank you so much for joining us here on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 25 minutes past midday. We're going to cross live to the National Farmers Union Conference, where our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, is with NFU President Tom Bradshaw.
Yes, good afternoon from the QE2 Centre, just a stone's throw from the Houses of Parliament. The tractors are here, and so was the Environment Secretary, Steve Reid, speaking a little bit earlier. There was some heckling in the questions afterwards, of course, about those inheritance tax changes that have gone down like a ton of bricks with the farming community. But I'm joined now by Tom Bradshaw, who is, of course, the president of the National Farmers Union. Tom, thank you very much for speaking to us on GB News today. This announcement that Rachel Reeves made in the budget, Steve Reid has said the word sorry a couple of times now, but do you see any sign that the government is listening to farmers?
I think you have to listen very carefully to what the Secretary of State said. He was sorry for the surprise the policy caused. I don't think he has actually apologised for the policy. It was a very frosty relationship in that meeting today. 700 members very angry about the way they've been treated, and the fact that the Chancellor Rachel Reeves still won't meet to discuss this. I think if she's so confident in the policy, surely she has the respect for the farming industry to sit down with us, to discuss, and to tell us why they are so right.
Do you think she's scared of you or worried about admitting that they've got it wrong? Because lots of experts have come out now to say that the government needs to look at its sums again. You have support not just from the farming community, but much more broadly than that, don't you?
I don't know anybody that believes the government are right on this policy now. I genuinely don't even believe the government think they're right. The question I ask myself now is, does politics let them have a road out of this? Because it's brave to demonstrate that leadership. It would be the leadership that our industry needs to accept that the proposals they've made are completely unfair. They catch a sector of our community absolutely in the eye of this storm. You heard from a member of our audience who's got a 90-plus-year-old mother. You heard my example, the letter I'd had from the grandson of a 94-year-old farmer. Those people have no ability to plan their way through this. Yet last week, the whole industry, all the farming unions, all the farming organisations presented a solution to Treasury that would still raise the tax that they say is so important, but it would take all of the unintended consequences away, and the Treasury slammed the door. They were not interested. They were absolutely convinced they are right. And so the farming industry will not go away, because we cannot go away because of the impacts that this will have on those elderly people, but also on our ability to produce the country's food. I look at the geopolitical situation with what's happening over in the Ukraine, Russia, the US. It feels like the world order is being turned upside down. Feeding 70 million people here on this island is the government's responsibility. Yet today they seem to be taking it for granted. These changes to inheritance tax restrict the investment for the future because farmers don't want to build their balance sheets. And so I urge the government to think again, to recognise that they need to make amendments, look at the solution we provided last week, and let's get on working together to produce this country's food at a time of such importance when we look at the geopolitical situation globally.
You said there was something like only 87 words about agriculture in the Labour manifesto. Do you think that fundamentally this Labour government just doesn't understand about farming and the farming communities, or even worse than that, potentially doesn't care?
I don't actually, because there were only 87 words, but there were some of those words that were really important. Food security is national security. a short phrase, but one that's been brought into real focus when I look at the geopolitics that I talked about. Now, food security doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen with policy. It happens because farmers are producing this country's food. Farming families right the way across the United Kingdom that should be investing for the future, because an investment today delivers food security for the next decade and beyond. But if they don't get us investing, then we will not have the food security which is so important.
Tom Bradshaw, thank you very much for talking to us on GB News today. A very strong message from the NFU president asking the government urgently to think again. The question is, will they listen?
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine Forster, there outside the QE2 building in the heart of Westminster, where the National Farmers Union conference has been.
Well, we're going to cross to the other side of Parliament Square now, take you live to the House of Commons, where we can see the Foreign Secretary David Lammy currently speaking, but the Prime Minister is due to speak in just a moment's time, and as soon as he does, we will give you that statement, because rumours are swirling Westminster, swirling that not only defence spending is about to be going up, announced by the Prime Minister in the House of Commons, but also the rumour is, how will it be paid for? Could the foreign aid budget be about to be slashed?
And what a statement that would be, coming from a Labour government. Foreign aid is something that they won't want to cut back on. A lot of the backbenchers in the Labour Party will not want that to be the decision that is made. But if Keir Starmer does make that decision, and it will be a bold one, to cut foreign aid in order to fund defence, what kind of support will he find in the country?
Well, in the Commons just moments ago, the SNP MP Chris Law voiced this rumour on those green benches, voicing the rumour that foreign aid could be cut. Currently, it's 0.6% of GDP. The rumour is it could be cut all the way down to 0.2% of GDP to fund this predicted increase in defence spending. All rumours as things stand, but what a political statement that would be from the Prime Minister.
It would be a huge political statement. I mean, that's a dramatic decrease in spending on foreign aid, something that a lot of people have been calling for a long time on the Conservative benches, on the Reform benches. It does appear as though Keir Starmer may well be listening to Donald Trump and ahead of that.
Indeed, we can see the Speaker of the House of Commons making a statement now. It seems that the Prime Minister will stand up very soon indeed. But one way to view this statement in the Commons today is potentially as a Reform Party containment strategy. Of course, we know that Ukraine has been a weak spot, shall we say, for the Reform Party. Their recent rise in the polls has been blunted, at least in the YouGov poll out today, down by 2 points. Still in the lead, the Reform Party, but only by 1 point in that new YouGov poll. Could the Prime Minister be wanting to press an advantage on the issue of Ukraine, where the vast majority of Brits feel very sympathetic to that country? And what a policy it would be to press that pressure point. Let's listen in.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin by giving my word to this House that this was not given to the media? Absolutely. I will absolutely have an inquiry into this, but I would not be that discourteous. I spoke to you this morning, Mr. Speaker. I wouldn't be discourteous to you or to the Leader of the Opposition in that way, or to the House, and I give you that assurance from this dispatch box. And I apologise to the Leader of the Opposition, and I will make that inquiry. Mr. Speaker, 3 years since Russia launched its vile assault on Ukraine, I would like to address the international situation and the implication for Britain's national security. Mr. Speaker, in my first week as Prime Minister, I travelled to the NATO summit in Washington with a simple message: that NATO and our allies could trust this government would fulfil Britain and indeed the Labour Party's historic role to put our collective security first. I spoke of my great pride, Mr. Speaker, to lead the party that was a founding member of NATO, the inheritor of the legacy of Clement Attlee and Ernest Bevin, who not only stood behind Winston Churchill in wartime, but won the peace by establishing the great post-war order here and abroad. Mr. Speaker, it's a proud legacy, but in a world like ours, it's also a heavy one, because the historical load we must carry to fulfil our duty is not as light as it once was. We must bend our backs across this House because these times demand a united Britain, and we must deploy all of our resources to achieve security. Mr. Speaker, as a young man, I vividly remember the Berlin Wall coming down. It felt as if we were casting off the shackles of history, a continent united by freedom and democracy. If you had told me then that in my lifetime we would see Russian tanks rolling into European cities again, I would not have believed you. Yet here we are, in a world where everything has changed. Because 3 years ago, that is exactly what happened. Britain can be proud of our response. British families opened their doors to fleeing Ukrainians. The yellow and light blue fluttering on town halls and churches, the length and breadth of this country. And the party opposite, in government, was robust in our response. I support that in opposition. I applaud them for it now. And we have built on that, bringing our support for Ukraine to a record level this year. Mr. Speaker, we should not pretend that any of this has been easy. Working people have already felt the cost of Russian actions through rising prices and bills. Nonetheless, one of the great lessons of our history is that instability in Europe will always wash up on our shores, and that tyrants like Putin only respond to strength. Russia is a menace in our waters, in our airspace, and on our streets. They've launched cyber attacks on our NHS. Only 7 years ago, a chemical weapons attack on the streets of Salisbury. We must stand by Ukraine, because if we do not achieve a lasting peace, then the economic instability, the threats to our security, they will only grow. And so, as the nature of that conflict changes, as it has in recent weeks, it brings our response into sharper focus. A new era that we must meet, as we have so often in the past, together and with strength. Mr. Speaker, the fundamentals of British strategy are unchanged. I know that the current moment is volatile, but there is still no good reason why they cannot endure. So let me spell out to the House exactly how we will renew them for these times. First, NATO is the bedrock of our security and will remain so. It has brought peace for 75 years. It is as important today as the day on which it was founded. Putin thought he would weaken NATO. He's achieved the exact opposite. And it remains the organisation that receives the vast bulk of our defence effort in every domain, and that must continue. Second, we must reject any false choice between our allies, between one side of the Atlantic or the other. That is against our history, country, and party, because it's against our fundamental national interest. The US is our most important bilateral alliance. It straddles everything from nuclear technology to NATO to Five Eyes, AUKUS and beyond. It survived countless external challenges in the past. We fought wars together with the closest partners in trade, growth and security. So this week, when I meet President Trump, I will be clear. I want this relationship to go from strength to strength. But, Mr. Speaker, strength in this world also depends on a new alliance with Europe. As I said in Paris last week, our commitment to European defence and security is unwavering. But now is the time to deepen it. So we will find new ways to work together on our collective interests and threats, protecting our borders, bringing our companies together, seeking out new opportunities for growth. Third, Mr. Speaker, we seek peace, not conflict. And we believe in the power of diplomacy to deliver that end. That, of course, is most pressing in Ukraine. Nobody in this House or this country wants the bloodshed to continue. Nobody. And Mr. Speaker, I've seen the devastation in Ukraine firsthand. What you see in places like Bucha, that never leaves you. But for peace to endure in Ukraine and beyond, we need deterrence. I know that this House will endorse the principle of winning peace through strength. Yeah. So we will continue to stand behind the people of Ukraine. We must ensure they negotiate their future, and we'll continue to put them in the strongest position for a lasting peace. Fourth, Mr. Speaker, we must change our national security posture, because a generational challenge requires a generational response. That will demand some extremely difficult and painful choices. And through those choices, as hard as they are, we must also seek unity, a whole society effort that will reach into the lives, the industries, and the homes of the British people. I started this statement by recalling the era of Attlee and Bevin. And of course, this year we will mark many anniversaries of that greatest generation. We must find courage in our history, courage in who we are as a nation, because courage is what our own era now demands of us. So starting today, I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Yeah. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so that we reach that level in 2027. Yeah. And we will maintain that for the rest of this Parliament. And let me spell that out, Mr. Speaker. That means spending £13.4 billion more on defence every year from 2027. But, Mr. Speaker, we also face enemies that are sophisticated in cyber attacks, sabotage, even assassination. And so our intelligence and security services are an increasingly vital part of protecting both us and our allies. So on top of the funding of 2.5% that I've just announced, going forward we will recognise the incredible contribution of our intelligence and security services to the defence of the nation, which means taken together we will be spending 2.6% on our defence from 2027. Yeah. But, Mr. Speaker, we must go further still. I've long argued that in the face of ongoing generational challenges, all European allies must step up and do more for our own defence. So, subject to economic and fiscal conditions and aligned with our strategic and operational needs, we will also set a clear ambition for defence spending to rise to 3% of GDP in the next Parliament. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear. The nature of warfare has changed significantly. That is clear from the battlefield in Ukraine. And so we must modernise and reform our capabilities as we invest. I equally want to be very clear that, like any other investment we make, we must seek value for money. And that's why we're putting in place a new defence reform and efficiency plan, jointly led by my right honourable friends, the Chancellor and the Defence Secretary. Yeah. This investment means that the UK will strengthen its position as a leader in NATO and in the collective defence of our continent. And we should welcome that role. It is good for our national security. It is also good for the defining mission of this government to restore growth to our economy. And we should be optimistic of what it can deliver in those terms. But, Mr. Speaker, in the short term, it can only be funded through hard choices. And in this case, that means we will cut our spending on development assistance, moving from 0.5% of GNI today to 0.3% in 2027, fully funding our increased investment in defence. I want to be clear to the House, that is not an announcement I am happy to make. I'm proud of our pioneering record on overseas development, and we will continue to play a key humanitarian role in Sudan, in Ukraine and in Gaza, tackling climate change, supporting multinational efforts on global health and challenges like vaccination. In recent years, the development budget was redirected towards asylum backlogs, paying for hotels. So as we're clearing that backlog at a record pace, there are efficiencies that will reduce the need to cut spending on our overseas programmes. But nonetheless, it remains a cut, and I will not pretend otherwise. We will do everything we can to return to a world where that is not the case and rebuild a capability on development. But at times like this, the defence and security of the British people must always come first. That is the #1 priority of this government. But, Mr. Speaker, it's not just about spending. Our whole approach to national security must now change. We will have to ask British industry, British universities, British businesses and the British people to play a bigger part. Use this to renew the social contract of our nation, the rights and responsibilities that we owe one another. The first test of our defence policy is, of course, whether it keeps our country safe. But the second should be whether it improves the conditions of the British people. Does it help provide the economic security that working people need? Because ultimately, as Attlee and Bevan knew, that is fundamental to national security as well. We will use this investment as an opportunity. We will translate defence spending into British growth, British jobs, British skills, British innovation. We will use the full powers of the Procurement Act to rebuild our industrial base. And, Mr. Speaker, as the Strategic Defence Review is well underway, and across government we're conducting a number of other reviews relevant to national security, it's obvious that these reviews must pull together. So before the NATO summit in June, we will publish a single national security strategy, and we will bring it to this House because, Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, that is how we must meet the threats of our age. Together and with strength. A new approach to defence, a revival of our industrial base, a deepening of our alliances, the instruments of our national power brought together, creating opportunity, assuring our allies, delivering security for our country. Mr. Speaker, at moments like these in our past, Britain has stood up to be counted. It has come together, and it has demonstrated strength. That is what the security of our country needs now, and it is what this government will deliver. And I commend this statement to the House.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for the partial copy of his statement. And now that I've heard the unredacted bits, I must welcome his response and his fulsome support for Ukraine. This weekend marked a grim milestone. It's now 3 years since Putin's invasion, and the Conservative Party stands resolutely with the people of Ukraine. Our hearts are with those still caught up in this conflict as we remember the many innocent lives lost. I will always be proud of the support the last Conservative government gave in the run-up to Putin's invasion and those first crucial weeks and months of the war. We helped prevent Kiev falling, and we supported Ukraine in regaining territory initially lost to Russia. But it is also true that overall, the West has not done enough to support Ukraine. As has been the case from the outset, it remains ultimately for Ukraine as a proud and sovereign nation that has sacrificed so much to defend itself and the fundamental freedoms that we all hold dear. It is up to them to decide their future. So we want this terrible war to end, but Ukraine needs to be at the negotiating table. And like President Zelensky, we hope for a lasting, reliable peace. but the West must continue to be intensely robust in the face of Putin's aggression. The lesson of the last 20 years is clear. He only comes back for more. The first duty of every government is to protect its people. That means a strong state that stands up for our national interest. Our foreign policy should seek to support our national interest. National interest should always come first. So I'm very pleased to hear the Prime Minister announce that increase to 2.5% by 2027. All of us on this side of the House welcome that. We've all wanted to see more spending on defence. I would ask the Prime Minister, on including the intelligence budget, can he confirm that this is new money for the intelligence services? And does this mean that there will be new money in the next financial year? The Prime Minister will know that I wrote to him at the weekend with suggestions on what we could do to help with increasing defence spending, so I welcome his announcement on repurposing money from the overseas development budget. That is absolutely right. And I look forward to him taking up my other suggestion of looking at what we can do on welfare. He will know that we had a fully funded plan and we urge him to take it up. Having said that, can the Prime Minister say in confidence that 2.7%, the 2.5% by 2027 is sufficient? Because we need to look at exactly how we fund this. He must not raise taxes further, as it will destroy our economy. We need a strong economy to pay for strong defence. He cannot borrow more. We are already spending more on debt interest than defence. We all know that he must make difficult decisions on spending. He has our support to do that. In his statement, the Prime Minister also told us about his new value for money defence reform and efficiency plan. Does he agree that the first thing that must be looked at is spending billions of taxpayer money leasing back a defence base on Diego Garcia that we currently own? Why is the Prime Minister still pursuing this deal? Earlier today, I made a speech about the realism that should drive our foreign policy. As part of this, the Prime Minister must scrap his disastrous plan to surrender the Chagos Islands and have British taxpayers pay for the privilege. The key difference between those of us on this side of the House and the Labour Party is that we know we need a strong economy for defence. We need a serious plan to get the British economy growing again. We do not have that with the latest budget from the Chancellor. So can the Prime Minister tell us if there is going to be a fiscal event this spring, even though his government is committed to only one fiscal event a year? In summary, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister made 4 points. I agree with him that NATO is a bedrock of our security, as I said this morning. And I agree that the US is our most important bilateral relationship. But friends tell each other when they disagree. We agree on this issue. We know that Ukraine must be supported, and I shared the concerns the Prime Minister had about statements that had been made about President Zelensky. I agree with the Prime Minister on protecting security in Europe. I welcome his continuing to strengthen alliances. But we must do that through NATO, building on the Joint Expeditionary Force approach. And we, of course, agree that we need peace with Ukraine, agreed. I don't necessarily agree with his change in the national security posture because we have different views on this. I am a conservative realist, not a progressive internationalist. But I want him to know that when he does the right thing, we will work with him in the national interest.
Prime Minister.
Can I first thank her for her support in relation to today's announcement and her support on Ukraine. That is important to the government, it's important to the House, but mostly it's important to the Ukrainians and to President Zelensky because they want to see unity in our House. They value unity in our House as they enter, after 3 years of a conflict, a very difficult stage of the war with Russia and the Russian aggression. And I hope and I believe we can maintain that unity in relation to Ukraine. We have for 3 years, and I'm very proud that this House has done that, notwithstanding a change of government for 3 long years. We will continue to do so. She asked about the money on defence and security and intelligence. There was new money at the budget in relation to that, but what I'm doing here is, in addition to the 2.5%, which is the increase in defence spend as it's always been understood, is to recognise that the nature of the threats to our country are different now, and that the security and intelligence services play a key part for us and for our allies in our defence, and that takes the total to 2.6. She asked me if we're going to tax to pay for the 2.5% or to borrow to pay for the 2.5%. The answer to that is no, which is why I've set out precisely pound for pound how we will pay for it today. That has meant a very difficult decision on overseas development, a very difficult decision, and not a decision that I wanted to take or that I'm happy to take. But it is important that we explain where the money will come from in terms, and explain where it's coming from today. And I was only ever going to come to the House with a plan, with a timeline in it, a percentage in it, and an answer to the question, how are you going to pay for it? I would not have come to the House with a fanciful plan. And she says they had a plan. She says, of course we did. I've views on it, but the Institute of Government said of their pledge for 2.5% by 2030, Institute for Government, it does not add up, it's not a serious plan. The Institute for Fiscal Studies called it misleading and opaque. I'm not giving my view, I'm giving the view of other bodies having looked at the plan that they put forward. They said they would fund it by cutting the civil service, and then they increased the civil service by 13,000. I'm not prepared to operate in that way, which is why we've taken the difficult decision on overseas development today to be absolutely clear where the money is coming from. In relation to the final point about the approach that we take here and whether there's a difference between us, I hope not. Because what I set out was NATO first as the bedrock of our security. I hope that that is common ground, whatever we may call our respective positions. I also set out that we must not choose between the US and our European allies. That is what I fundamentally believe, and I will resist that choice. I hope that that is common ground between us, notwithstanding the language that she uses, because that is important, not for the exchanges over this dispatch box, but the future defence and security of our country and of Europe. Thank you.
Defence Select Committee Tamanji Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement on defence.
Live from the House of Commons to Downing Street, the nexus where that decision was taken. Christopher Hope, our political editor, is there for us. Christopher.
Well, that is dramatic. You have there Sir Keir Starmer announcing the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s. To recap there for viewers and listeners, they're boosting defence spending to 2.5% of our GDP by 2027. That's 3 years before the Tories plan to do it if they had won power. You add a 1.1% of that to the intelligence agencies, that's 2.6% of spending on defence. They're getting the money by cutting the aid budget from 0.5% of our GDP, our national income, to 0.3%. That is worth an extraordinary £13.4 billion a year from 2027, and he goes further than that. The PM says there that by 2035 we'll be up to 3% of our GDP on defence spending. A complete change in tone, a change in posture from this government, a recognition, I think, of what has changed since Donald Trump came into power and what's happening in Ukraine. So a real moment here, and those choices are very difficult for this Prime Minister, a Labour Prime Minister, of course. He says there's a very difficult choice to make on aid. He says it remains, though, a cut, and I will not pretend otherwise. That is Keir Starmer facing up to the threats to this country and taking action which will not be helped. He doesn't want to do it, but even so, he's doing it in national interest.
Very interesting indeed. Christopher Hope, thank you so much for bringing us that analysis from Downing Street. But with us in the studio is Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who was listening to that announcement just then. Very interesting, significant boost to defence spending. Why has it happened now?
Well, there's no doubt it's happened now because
Sir Keir Starmer, whether he admits it or not, is being bounced into making that commitment to raise defence spending by 2007, bringing it forward to that 2.5%. It's still only 0.2%, even though it adds up to £13.4 billion of extra spending. The fact is the MOD has massive structural deficiencies over years and years, decades of salami slicing by previous governments who have thought it expedient to cut more and more from defence, taking advantage of the so-called Cold War dividend from the end of the Cold War to prioritise other domestic issues. So there are big issues within the MOD, big structural issues that need to be dealt with, and much of the extra money will be sucked up in just getting the MOD, getting the military back onto an even keel again before you even talk about an expansion. Remember, the armed forces, the army, has reduced to its lowest level since Napoleonic times. We've got rid of frontline combat ship after combat ship, where the Navy now, although they're producing new frigates and eventually new destroyers, it's in a lamentable state of not being able to field enough of these frontline combatants to do the tasks that the Royal Navy would like to do around the world, the policing operations that are so vital to an island nation like the UK.
So let's put some real numbers on this. We talk a lot about percentages, and it's pretty hard to sort of get your grips on. This year, we spent £53.9 billion on defence spending in the UK. Keir Starmer's saying there'll be £13.4 billion of extra spending. So that, in my quick maths in head, takes it from £53.9 billion to £69.3 billion. That is a significant increase. There is some concern, however, that with that, £13.4 billion annual increase, how much of that is actually just going to replace the munitions that we've been sending to Ukraine? How much of this is backfill to get us back to where we were before this war started?
It's not even Ukraine, as I say. It's, the army in general and the Navy and the RAF have seen frontline air squadrons, ships, and indeed in the army with troop numbers, tanks, other sort of combat systems slowly but surely eroded. So trying to get that back to more sort of potent levels, combined with, as you say, Tom, the fact that we have sent so much of our stocks of ammunition and missiles and other armaments off to Ukraine will absolutely require backfilling, and that's why they want to put industry on a war footing as well. They've spoken about that for a while to increase the level of sort of armament production. And of course, industry won't do that until there are firm commitments from government that the money is there. Now you're getting that firm commitment. This is just a pathway to 2.5%. He is committed there that by 2007 it will increase to 2.5% of GDP. And then, of course, that also desire to get to 3% in the next Parliament. So although that might take a while to get to 3%, if we do go to 3%, that will be a very significant increase indeed in military spending terms, and will make a very big difference, I think, to the resources that the military have to play with and the numbers that they can recruit. And the hope, I think, from the military chiefs will be that if you get a commitment at this stage from a government to go to 3% within the next Parliament, even if it's not Labour that get in the next time round, it would be very difficult for, say, the Conservatives not to be fighting an election campaign on an equal desire to get to 3%
Absolutely.
of GDP as well.
Well, for a long time, it did seem politically that there was a reluctance to actually increase that defence spending. Military chief after military chief, expert after expert said the government needs to do this, needs to prioritise defence. Yes, there's welfare. Yes, there's education. Yes, there's everything else, the NHS, to spend money on. But this should be a top priority. Now, it does appear as though Donald Trump has finally got his way and Keir Starmer has given in. But what pays for this? We understand foreign aid being cut by 0.3%, is it? From 0.5 to 0.2 is going to pay for it. I don't know exactly what those figures would be.
It's 0.5. It's 0.5 down to 0.3,
is that enough?
which would pay for the rise that we're talking about. It wouldn't, of course, pay for the rise to 3%, should we go to that in the next Parliament. So, yes, there will be some tough choices that will have to be made for that. Even this time around, some tough choices and, budget rejiggling that's going to have to be
This is what Rachel Reeves was saying, according to the papers, saying, well, we're going to have to either raise taxes massively or make huge swathing cuts to various Whitehall departments.
Yeah.
But it seems as though Keir Starmer is telling the public, no, we're just going to cut foreign aid and it will fund all of this.
Well, listen, the number crunchers will be better than me at trying to determine what the actual figures are from that cut in foreign aid and whether that will meet, as Sir Keir Starmer claims, the additional 0.2% to get us to 2.5%. But as I say, it's difficult to understate how or overstate, I should say, how important this announcement is. Whether he's been bounced into the announcement earlier than he probably desired by the messages coming out of the White House and Donald Trump's insistence that NATO leaders must go up to 5% of GDP. That aside, I think this government, the previous government as well, did finally realise that defence spending couldn't continue to be cut year on year, as has been happening, because of the threat that we face now internationally, not just from Russia, but from Iran, from North Korea, from China, and all kinds of non-state actors as well that threaten the UK and its partners.
Now, the Germans are saying Europe needs to stand on its own feet when it comes to defence. Could we see other European nations bump up that defence spending and quickly?
Well, listen, I think that absolutely plays into this. So you heard from Sir Keir Starmer there saying NATO is a cornerstone. Absolutely, NATO will be the cornerstone. But we don't know how things might mature in a Trump government going forward. We remember in the last Trump presidency, NATO went through a fairly rocky time. Many would say within NATO circles being undermined by Donald Trump. He would say that he was pushing for NATO members to do much more to boost their funding to NATO. Ironically, after that 2022 main invasion by Russia, that really signalled a big shift in many European countries in particular in terms of their efforts to spend more on their defence, which has, of course, also then really, as far as NATO is concerned, emboldened NATO and strengthened NATO amongst these allies.
And this now gets into the context of what are we going to use with this extra money being spent? £13.4 billion extra every single year, taking the budget up from 53.9 to 67.3 billion, i.e. a 25% increase on the amount that we were spending. That's a quarter extra that we're spending on this budget. We're hearing that in Germany, the coalition negotiations following their election is talking about lifting the debt limit. The victorious CDU party wants to lift that debt limit specifically to spend more on their armed forces. We know that France has announced more defence spending too. Could this all be part of a future peace plan for Ukraine that does, in the end, use what the Prime Minister proposed just a couple of weeks ago, British boots on the ground?
Well, I think all of the above, yes. I mean, they are planning for potentially the expected and the unexpected in military terms, because they just don't know how things are going to play out. One, with the negotiations, if we even ever get to the stage where a peace deal is agreed, if a peace deal isn't agreed, and say, for instance, that it is President Zelensky who decides that the terms of that peace deal are just too much for Ukraine to accept, it may well be the case then that America decides, well, that's it, we're stepping back, no more in the way of military aid will go to Ukraine. And then there's a very, very tough choice for these European leaders who have very publicly stated their long-term goal, their support for Ukraine to ensure that that country's sovereignty and ability to fight back against Russia is maintained. Are they going to have to put the money where their mouth is and step in and really also double which effectively they would have to do to stay still, double the commitment that Europe is giving at the moment to Ukraine? Well, in order to double the commitment to Ukraine, you would be taking a big chunk of that 2.5% or the 0.2% increase in GDP
We currently
away.
give about £3 billion a year to Ukraine.
£3.5 billion.
£3.5 billion.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, if we were to double that, that would take this down to just 10 billion increase rather than 13.4.
Yeah.
Still a significant increase.
Depending on our GDP, I suppose, as well.
Oh yeah. Well, if we go into recession,
Yes.
then all of this is moot.
Then all of this is moot.
So I'm not sure we're at the stage yet where the generals and the field marshals and the sort of admirals are going to be sitting around wondering what shiny new pieces of equipment they'll be able to buy. There are still deep structural issues within the MOD that need to be sorted out. More of a guarantee, perhaps, that more of their capabilities, like these incredible, amazing 2 giant aircraft carriers that we have, are not under threat, perhaps, going forward. And maybe they can get them some more of these F-35s that they've long promised but have been very slow in delivering.
Well, let's hope we get a good price for all of this new kit, hopefully.
And Mark, you ask what the generals might make of it. Why don't we ask a lieutenant? Let's hear the thoughts of the defence analyst, former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Stuart, thanks so much for being with us. I mean, this is huge news for defence in this country, a 25% spending increase.
Well, it's certainly a move in the right direction, and something that I think all of us with a military interest have been calling for at least the past few years. The defence budget, of course, covers many issues, which you've already noted, including aid to Ukraine, including pensions, and so on and so forth. But there's no doubt that it will be welcomed and begin to perhaps redress some of the mistakes been made in defence funding over the past maybe 20 years or so. Having said that, the one thing I believe that has to be sorted before we buy any more shiny new kit or any new bits and bobs is we have to sort out the personnel problem, because all the shiny new bits of kit in the world are not much use if you don't have the people to operate them. And at the moment, all 3 of our armed services are quite short of personnel.
Your thoughts on how this is going to be paid for, Stuart? So the Prime Minister has told us that this is going to be paid for through cuts to foreign aid. He's not happy about it, but he says it's essential.
Yes, I think that the government has had to reprioritise its spending in the light of the international situation, which includes, of course, the ongoing war in Ukraine and, of course, the conflict in Gaza, but also the Trump administration's early moves in terms of asking or demanding, in fact, that European countries shoulder a bigger part of the burden of defence. So the short-term solution seems to have been to cut the aid budget, and I think many people will find that distasteful, but I think it's a necessary move. But in the longer term, I can't see any other option than taxes to increase, and that includes income tax. And of course, that is deeply unpopular with the electorate.
Say that it might be unpopular to some. A lot of people are getting in touch saying, why not just cut the entire foreign aid budget for defence? So there are lots of different views on that one. But how do we make sure that this money is spent where it needs to be?
Well, there's the very, and perhaps the most important question of all, is that the Ministry of Defence does not have a particularly admirable record in spending taxpayers' money wisely, and particularly in the field of defence procurement. And the organisation needs a complete, as you would say, root and branch reform. And I hope that's going to happen. I think John Healey, the Defence Secretary, has alluded to this in previous statements that he's made. But we have to make sure we spend the money wisely. And it's not just a case of buying more F-35s, although that would be very nice, or more tanks, although that would also be very nice. But it's got to be spent wisely in the correct manner on the correct things. And I come back to the point I made about personnel. We need to make sure that our armed forces are, as far as we can, make sure fully staffed with qualified people to operate any shiny new kit that happens to come along.
What are your thoughts, Stuart, on how this came about? It does appear as though this is about Donald Trump and some of the threats he may have made. Now, he was asking for 5%, wasn't he, from European countries? We're hopefully moving towards 3% by the next Parliament, so in a few years' time. 2.5 is the immediate boost. Does this come down to pressure from the United States?
Well, I think that's a very large part of it, but there has been a considerable realization over the past few months that, given the threats from Russia, etc., that our defence spending has not been adequate. And I think you could almost draw up a list of multiple senior officers who've been saying this for some considerable time. But the catalyst for it happening now, I would say, is definitely the advent of the second Trump administration and him continuing with his theme that Europe has to bear a bigger share of the defence burden. And I think that's why this has come to a head now. And many, like me, would argue, and not before time.
Well, yes, I mean, people like yourself, if I may say that, have been banging the drum for increased defence spending for how many years? For how many years? And ignored mostly, or there's been, vague promises.
Well, we saw under the last government, we saw Boris Johnson in Madrid announced that it's going up to 2.5. Then Rishi Sunak becomes Prime Minister and cuts it again. Then Rishi Sunak gets into political difficulty and announces a great announcement, 2.5% to be spent on defence. And then Keir Starmer gets in and no such commitment exists. Now Keir Starmer, this is the third time that the third Prime Minister in almost as many years, 2022 I think was the first year that we saw this commitment for it to go up. What are we now, 2025? Third time in 3 years that a Prime Minister has promised to get defence spending up to 2.5% of GDP. But I suppose this is the first time that actually he's spelt out how it's going to be paid for.
Interesting it comes on the day of an energy bill increase announcement. But anyway, Stuart.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there are two audiences for what Sir Keir Starmer has just said. The first is obviously a domestic one, and many of those, like me, who've been banging on about the need to resource defence properly will be pleased that we're now heading in the right direction. But the other audience, of course, will be Donald Trump and the American administration. And I guess it's a sort of sign that Britain, at least, is willing to accede to what Trump has been saying about increased spending in European nations. And I think really the next interesting part will be how this is received when Starmer and Trump meet in America on Thursday.
Alfred, thank you very much indeed for your time. Really appreciate you coming on this. A huge, significant announcement from the Prime Minister, not before time.
No, and I've just been doing a bit of maths here because the Prime Minister...
He's just been doing his maths while I've been talking.
The Prime Minister did seem to say that this number is going up by £13.4 billion every year. That's not just being reported by us, that's been reported by a number of different news agencies in this country. But that would mean that the defence spending is going up by 25%, which would take it over the 2.5%. I've divided that number, 13.4 billion, by 3, because this is 2027, 2028, 2029. That's the rest of the Parliament in the terms set out by the Prime Minister. It seems that perhaps this is a cumulative figure over the course of the Parliament, so not £13.5 billion every single year, but £4.5 billion each of the years from 2027, 2028, 2029, which means that the increase in defence spending isn't taking it up to 67.3 billion, but 58.4 billion. Mark, did the Prime Minister misspeak in the House of Commons?
I don't know. We're going to seek clarification from Downing Street and the Ministry of Defence on that one. It would certainly seem that 13.4 billion a year is quite a high figure set against the 53 billion which is the current annual budget for the Ministry of Defence. So it might be that it is over the remaining 2 and a bit years of the Parliament that figure takes into account. So regardless, it's still a significant increase, and if it's 13.4 billion for those remaining 2 and a bit years, that's good, and it's a boost, and it will be absolutely welcomed by the Ministry of Defence. The increase, or the desire to increase to 3% of GDP will be a very significant boost. But it will be interesting to see, because he's going to be asked on this in the weeks and months ahead, is what the time frame for that is. Is it 3% of GDP by the end of the next Parliament? Certainly not going to be at the beginning of the next Parliament, because that would just be unmanageable in terms of such a rapid increase by to that 3% of GDP. So it might be by the end of the next Parliament, but still, it's going in the right direction. I think those military chiefs will be very encouraged by this, set against the backdrop, as I say, of a service that they've had to try their best to manage as effectively more and more of their defence budget has been cut away, key assets shelved or sold off.
Yes, I mean, if it was 13.4 billion in 1 year increase, then that would be the entire foreign aid budget from last year. So it's probably not that. That probably is over the course of however many years.
It seems that the Prime Minister must have stumbled a little bit. But let's go across to the former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Dannatt. Lord Dannatt, thanks so much for being with us. This is, of course, a significant announcement from the Prime Minister. But again, we've heard similar announcements like this from both Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson before they seem to fall by the wayside.
Well, yes, I hear what you say, and history will show that. But I think we have to take at face value what the Prime Minister said in the House of Commons just now, and that he is pledging to increase defence spending to 2.5%, and that will come into effect by 2027. Ministers, Prime Ministers, MPs don't like misleading the House of Commons, so I think we have to take that, and it's welcome news. Of course, as other people are saying, this is a step in the right direction, and it's a welcome step in the right direction, but we haven't reached the objective yet. There will be further discussions to be had when we see how world events pan out as to what the proper level of our defence expenditure should be in order for us, as a key European member, to play its role in Europe, given that the United States wants to dial down its role in Europe.
What will this mean for our military and armed forces and, I guess, our security as a country?
Well, I'm not going to give you a shopping list of what needs to be done, but
I was hoping for one.
That's all right. There is an historic legacy of repeated peace dividends being taken from our defence budget, going right back to the early 1990s at the end of the Cold War. And we've accepted increased risk to our military capability. But now, when we're faced with our key partner, the United States, wanting to do less to secure Europe, we've got our principal foe, if you like, Vladimir Putin, a proven aggressor continuing his war in Ukraine. It doesn't take the brains of, well, I won't say an archbishop, because we haven't got one really at the moment, to realise that we've got to spend more on our own defence. So this is welcome. I mean, in the wider world, it's disappointing that we're probably going to plunder the international development budget, because the UK's influence in the world often comes through a combination of our hard power and our soft power, our diplomacy and our development funds. But priorities have to be established, and a priority that's urgent now is spending more on defence. How much more? That'll be debated over the coming years, but going from 2.3 to 2.5 is a significant step in the right direction. So congratulations to the Prime Minister for listening to the argument, doing the right thing, and it'll give him a slightly easier ride with Donald Trump in the White House on Thursday.
Mark White, our Home Security Editor, would like to ask you a question, if that's OK.
Lord Dannatt, I know we've spoken about defence spending on a number of occasions in recent years, but could I just push you on that? I know you don't want to get into shopping lists, but surely one of the most important things to be able to do with a bit of extra headroom in terms of a budget is to reverse this current programme to reduce the army size down to that of Napoleonic times.
Oh, I like you very much. You're kicking a ball at an open goal there. You're absolutely right. The army has never been as small as it is. And of course, put it in the wider context of if there is a serious possibility of the UK joining other European countries in putting a peacekeeping force into Ukraine to carry out a mission of some sort or other, we will need numbers. And it's not just a question of sending 5,000. The way we do our business is, because these are human beings we're dealing with, have lives to lead. When we send 5,000, that means 20,000, because we've got 3 other groups going around the cycle, training, preparing, carrying on with what they need to do, getting ready to deploy. So, yes, this increased money, there'll be lots of calls on where it should go to, but certainly one of the major calls is not just army numbers, but also army equipment. There's been a serious underfunding of the army's equipment for quite some time. So this is good news, a step in the right direction, but we've got a long way to go.
And Lord Dannatt, are you confident that other European countries will follow suit?
Well, it's a lovely question. I can't possibly be confident. There is a track record of the UK leading, and I think that's welcome. I would like to think that France and Germany won't be too far behind, and maybe Monsieur Macron will probably want to match 2.5 quam colorime. I mean, well, that's what the Latin said, isn't it? As soon as possible, anyway.
It does seem, however, that there is often a tendency with countries around the world to fight the last war. And very often we build up the capabilities that would have been perfect in the war that was just fought. I wonder, with the big capital expenses that the MOD is making, our new aircraft carriers, the other large investments, I know we're designing a new supersonic aeroplane. I mean, all of these things, are they not going to be irrelevant in a world of AI, drones and asymmetrical warfare?
Well, you ask a very good question, and of course that is a almost daily challenge to the scientific community involved in the Ministry of Defence. We have to look back at last wars and see what went well and what didn't go well. We have to keep an eye on technology. Of course, the most instructive set of events at the present moment is to look at what is going on today in Ukraine. And there is a combination of high-tech capabilities and some low-tech capabilities. There is trench warfare, gutter fighting going on, but that's enabled by modern communications. It's hugely influenced by the proliferation of drones, both to observe and to attack other drones. So we have to be really open-minded to monitor and be with and try and get ahead of, where possible, that's where research and development is so important, movements in military technology. I'm afraid going from 2.3 to 2.5 is a useful shot in the arm, but as I said a moment or two ago, it's not the answer. There is a long way to go if we're going to have the military capability that we need, that others will respect, that Putin will respect, to make sure that we play our part, a major role in the future security of Europe.
OK, well, Lord Richard Dannett, thank you very much indeed, former head of the British Army, just reacting to that news, 2.3 to 2.5% GDP on defence spending. Interesting what Lord Dannett said there about the foreign aid, how that will be missed. Because a lot of people seem to think it's a complete waste of money.
And yet it seems that there's a big political element to this announcement today as well. Mark White, the Prime Minister has made a clear choice. What do you make of the idea that there will be some parts of the world that will miss British influence now and that this might actually damage our security in a wider sense?
Well, there is absolutely a case to be argued on that point that soft power is a vital component in trying to ensure better relations with countries that otherwise might go down a different route, or individuals within that country might go down a different route. And, of course, just in terms of global stability anyway, it has got to be a good thing to try to do as much as possible, individual countries around the world, to lift those other countries that are perhaps a bit less fortunate up. But there's the reality of the situation that we face and the more pressing need here back home to ensure that our country is best defended against what is a very real important threat around the world. And as I said before, it is not just Vladimir Putin in Russia and what is playing out in Ukraine or even here in the UK on occasions as well, but it's much further afield. In the Middle East, well, thankfully we're at a situation at the moment where we've had some kind of cessation in southern Lebanon and in Gaza for the time being. But as we know, history tells us that region could flare up at any point. Iran is a continued threat to that region. North Korea, China, there are many threats out there that Britain needs to play its part in defending against.
Indeed, and yet nuzzled within that statement was a nugget of information on migrant hotels. Because Keir Starmer said before the House there that as the migrant hotel programme is wound down, there will be billions of savings that then could maintain projects overseas. Because we know migrant hotels are currently funded out of the foreign aid budget. I mean, is this a realistic possibility? Does the government actually think that we're going to shut these migrant hotels and clear the backlog?
They just secured them for another 4 years, haven't they, Mark?
There's the wish and there's the reality. And the reality is, despite Labour's avowed aim to end the use of migrant hotels, which reached more than 450 migrant hotels under the Conservatives, Labour actually have increased again the number of migrant hotels since he came to power, because they've been faced with the reality that the numbers coming across the English Channel, far from slowing down, with Keir Starmer vowing to smash the gangs, have actually increased. And last year we finished on significantly more boats that crossed the Channel than the previous year. And they have to be housed somewhere.
I'm a bit worried that we're not going to be spending enough money on shrimp health in Bangladesh.
I'm sure that's at the forefront of many voters. Mark, we will see you again very shortly, of course, keeping across this story throughout the day here on GB News. But how would you like to dunk all of our politicians in the River Thames? Yes, seriously, we're talking about a proposal to move Parliament to a floating barge after this.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. The top story this lunchtime, well, as we have just been hearing, Sir Keir Starmer has this afternoon announced a major plan to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, up from the current 2.3%. However, the Prime Minister also announced a cut in international aid from 0.5 to 0.3% of national income. The announcement comes just ahead of Sir Keir Starmer's high-stakes meeting with the US President, who has been demanding that European leaders ramp up their defence budgets. Well, in that speech to the Commons earlier this afternoon, the Prime Minister told MPs the increase will mean an extra £13.4 billion a year for defence.
Starting today, I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so that we reach that level in 2027. And we will maintain that for the rest of this Parliament.
However, the Prime Minister's pledge has been slammed by critics as too little, too late, with calls for immediate action to strengthen funding. In a major speech this morning, Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch argued 2.5% isn't enough and said that painful decisions on defence spending are needed.
We can no longer hide behind vapid statements that were, at best, ambitious 20 years ago and are now today outright irrelevant. It is time to speak the truth. The world has changed and the UK is not ready.
The BBC has issued a public apology today after a review revealed missed opportunities to address concerns over the former Radio 1 DJ Tim Westwood's conduct. While the report found no widespread knowledge of serious allegations, the broadcaster admits it did fall short of its values, apologising to those affected and promising changes to prevent future failures. Westwood, who strongly denies all allegations, was accused of creating a toxic work environment during his time at the BBC. The £3.3 million review also outlined steps the BBC says it's already taken to tackle bullying and harassment. Former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, is facing potential disciplinary action after a scathing abuse report rocked the Church of England. The Macon review revealed that the church leaders, including Carey, failed to act on decades of abuse by Christian camp leader John Smythe, despite being aware of it. Carey, who resigned as a priest in December over a separate case, is one of 10 clergy named in a report now under investigation. The Church's National Safeguarding Team says it's seeking to bring proceedings, even though the 12-month time limit has passed. The Church has also issued a heartfelt apology to the victims, with survivors' lifelong suffering at the heart of their response. And in Israel, hundreds of people have lined the streets for the funeral procession of 83-year-old Oded Lifshitz, who was kidnapped and killed by Hamas. His remains were returned last week, along with those of the Bibas family, after being held captive since the 7th of October attacks. His wife was freed weeks after their abduction, while authorities confirmed Oded had been killed at least a year ago. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you at the top of the hour. Now, though, it's over to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Russell Holding. In the Highland, the A87 is closed in both directions between Inverinate and Dorney after an accident. Delays towards there, and as you divert in Shropshire, the A41 is partly blocked each way by an accident between Tong and the A5 at the Pickmere roundabout at Sheriff Hales, causing delays. The M42 in Warwickshire is partly blocked southbound by an accident at Junction 8 for the M6 near Birmingham, causing delays. In Kent, the A20 is partly blocked each way by an accident on London Road near to the Sandy Lane junction at West Malling, causing delays. And in East Sussex, the A259 remains closed in both directions along Grand Junction Road off the A23 Palace Pier roundabout in Brighton because of an unsafe building. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here
We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
OK, good afternoon, Britain. It's 39 minutes past 1. This is a bit of a different story for you. The Houses of Parliament could be moved onto a floating barge.
Yes, a group backed by a senior Conservative are proposing a radical solution to the building's restoration costs today.
Yes, Parliament is set to consider these new proposals that would see the Commons and the Lords moved onto a barge on the Thames, as you can see, because the cost of repairing the palace is skyrocketing.
Yes, so this would be a temporary solution while the House of Commons is restored. Currently, it's falling down. There are people employed 24 hours a day to patrol for fires. We all saw what happened to Notre Dame. Well, this group is proposing a new waterside development to go alongside Parliament. And this should allow the Commons to continue to sit while restoration works continue.
OK, well, Svein Klaustrup Olsen is the project lead for this waterside development, and he joins us now. I do hope I haven't butchered your name there. But tell us more about this. How did this idea come about?
Well, it came about because I saw the need for presenting something that could work, and particularly finding a solution so both the houses could be in one building. There are alternatives where they are moving to two different locations, and this one can host both of them and provide the same sizes and dimensions as they have in what they use at the present in Parliament.
Because, to be clear, currently the plan is that the House of Lords and the House of Commons moves out of the historic palace. I think the plan is that the Lords goes to a conference centre across the other side of Parliament Square. The House of Commons goes to what used to be the Department of Health. I mean, spread around different places in a very sort of non-functional...
Undignified.
Undignified, perhaps. and so every time MPs have voted on this, they've sort of kicked the can down the road. The project hasn't got moving, but this idea, this could keep the Commons and the Lords together in quite an elegant floating solution. I suppose the one question would be, how much would this all cost?
Well, that's a good question, of course, but so far this is a concept. And to price something without having enough knowledge of exactly what is required is a bit difficult. But we have an estimate that we can offer this on a very competitive costing, simply because it's based on what's called circular economy. And that means you don't necessarily have to have any capital expenditure, because you can lease the project, because it has a life after the Parliament has been completed, as housing.
Ah, so the government would lease this from you, and then at the end of the time, when the restoration works have continued, you'd have it back and you'd turn it into places for people to live.
Affordable housing.
And presumably not alongside the House of Commons, where it is in these pictures.
Somewhere in the river or somewhere in another river.
Ah.
Absolutely not. You couldn't have the politicians right next to the plebs in the affordable housing, could you?
Well, I think there would be security concerns, but this is a bold solution. I mean, why floating on the river as opposed to anywhere else? Or why can't the works be done sort of around Parliament as they currently sit in the chambers as they are now?
It doesn't float on the river. You float it in, up the river, to the position where it's going to be in front of the existing Parliament, and then it's being drained and it sits on the river bed. So it doesn't move and it's in position. And it's made up of a number of modulars on barges, and when it's all put together, it's an area of 7,500 square meter. This is the basic, and from that one you can build the parliament so we can comply with all the necessary requirements size-wise.
Yeah, because what was the original estimate of how much restoring the Houses of Parliament was going to cost us all? Huge.
I mean, I think that there were varying estimates. If MPs stayed inside the Houses of Parliament and sort of all of the works, the vital restoration works that need to happen, I mean, the place is falling down. If MPs stayed inside, it would take 70 years and tens upon tens of billions of pounds. I think if in the decant option it could have cost, I think, I'm trying to remember, I think it's 40 or 50 billion pounds. But I suppose with this solution, there is no upfront cost of building because you take that cost on, your organisation would build it and then lease it to Parliament, so the taxpayer would make a saving, presumably.
Yes, of course, absolutely. There is no capital expenditure. It's a lease. It's offered to the Parliament on a lease basis for the duration of the restoration programme.
And how long would that take?
That's for the Parliament to answer, but let's say 15 years, something like that.
So it would need to be a sort of elegant solution if we're going to have a chambers of our democracy there for a decade and a half.
Well, thank you very much for coming into the studio and discussing that with us. It's quite the proposal. I remember it's not as glamorous as you think. It's quite grotty in some of the Houses of Parliament. I worked for an MP for a time and I was in this little tiny office in the basement of one of the buildings and rats.
Yeah. Rats, I mean, the water cuts off, the electricity cuts off, there's no heating. There is sort of, what are they called? You know, the corrugated sort of boxes, what are they called? Containers. Containers just laying around everywhere, temporary offices.
Some of it's a bit of a dump, actually.
It's not fitting of the mother of all parliaments.
No, well, thank you very much, Svein Karlstrup Olsen, who is the project lead for this development.
Well, now, if you're in search of getting away from the Thames or indeed any other parts of the United Kingdom, perhaps you're after some winter sun, here's the top holiday destinations for you in Europe.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
If you're heading away for some winter sun through this week, there will be some fine weather around across parts of the Mediterranean, but currently around the eastern Med it's still fairly unsettled. Some heavy rain, some strong winds and temperatures well below average for the time of year, but these are gradually going to be lifting. Further west, a drier story across many parts of, well, France and Spain, but there is some wet weather starting to push its way in as we go later on this week. Otherwise, some decent sunshine on offer. See you later.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Cloudier start across the southeast this morning, but eventually any rain easing away, leading to a day of sunny spells and showers, though some of these could be quite heavy and thundery at times, particularly across the far northwest where we'll see the bulk of the showers through this afternoon, and then any rain eventually easing away across the southeast, particularly across parts of Sussex and Kent, but leading to a brighter afternoon. And on the whole, it should be a relatively bright afternoon for most of us with plenty of sunny spells, though keep your raincoat handy. Still some showers bubbling up through the afternoon, particularly across the far northwest where we'll see the most frequent and intense showers with a risk of hail and thunder. And temperatures a slight dip compared to yesterday, but still above average for the time of year. Highs of around 10 to 11 Celsius across the far south. To end the day across Scotland, still plenty of these showers feeding through, still heavy at times with a risk of hail and thunder, perhaps even bringing some snow across the Scottish Highlands. Largely dry across Aberdeenshire though. Plenty of showers skirting through across Northern Ireland, northwestern parts of England, and perhaps a few still lingering on across parts of England and Wales too, but eventually easing away, leading to a drier night, particularly across eastern areas. And with clear skies, temperatures will soon dip away, likely leading to a frost by the morning, but a different story in western areas. We'll see something slightly milder moving through and some outbreaks of rain starting to move in through here too, particularly across Northern Ireland, parts of Wales, parts of Devon and Cornwall by the morning too. This could be a little bit heavy and also quite blustery at times. So a bit of a westy split in the weather by the time we reach the morning, but any outbreaks of rain slowly shifting their way eastwards through the afternoon, perhaps turning a little bit brighter behind, but still can't rule out some showers, particularly once again across far western parts of Scotland, where here too it could be a little bit blustery, and temperatures fairly similar to today, but perhaps a little bit chillier across Scotland, highs of only 6 to 7 Celsius here. Bye-bye.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 10 to 2. Now, another blow to Brits today as energy bills are set to rise again, this time by more than 100 quid, 111 quid a year from April.
Yes, it's important this stays in the headlines despite that dramatic news on defence spending. Your energy bills will be going up. And during the election campaign, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, he repeatedly promised, didn't he, that his policies would save families £300.
Only Labour offers a plan for real change to cut energy bills for good with GB Energy, our new publicly owned energy company.
Well, that was him then, but since Ed Miliband took office, there have been not one, not two, but 3 energy price rises.
Right, well, let's go back to Manchester now and speak to GB News North West of England reporter Sophie Reber, who's been speaking to people who might be affected by this. Tell us, Sophie.
Well, good afternoon to you both. This is news today that is going to affect people across the board. So far in Manchester today, we've spoken to a local resident who's concerned about how he's going to heat his home. We spoke to a landlord and her tenant about how they're mitigating the issues of rising energy bills. You're joining us now in Prove Pizza, which is a restaurant here in West Didsbury in Manchester. They, as a business, are also going to have to face the rising cost of energy bills. We've heard this morning that per year £111 for the average household. But let's speak now to the restaurant operator Andy Williams. Andy, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon from this lovely restaurant. Talk to us about how the business is going to be affected.
Well, I mean, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen costs rise massively in all areas, including heating, electricity, gas, as well as our food costs, our staffing costs. And I think what we need is just a little bit of sort of certainty with what's going to happen. Because one day you're finding out costs are going down, the next day the costs are going back up again. We've just heard today about the increases that are going to come into place in April. That's on the back of increases that happened in January this year. So really, it makes it difficult to plan, I suppose, and budget for anything when you're not quite sure what costs you're going to get hit with around the corner. I mean, we're just about to do our budgets for 2024-25. 25-26 even. So it really makes it quite difficult when you're already kind of trying to sort of save every penny you can.
You make a really interesting point there, Andy, that it isn't just, of course, energy bills that have gone up. It's the cost of food, it's the cost of staffing, everything across the board. It must be making it really difficult for businesses like yours. I want to speak to you about, I know this isn't the only one, there's 4 businesses, aren't they? Yeah. And earlier we were speaking about one crucial difference between 2 of them and 2 of the others. Yeah. Talk to me about that.
Well, we've got 2 restaurants, this one here in Manchester and one in Sheffield that are wood-fired ovens. And we've got 2, another one in Sheffield and one in Hertford.
Very much, Sophie Reaper, for speaking to people there in Manchester. Apologies at the technical difficulties there at the end. But we've got to tell you some breaking news. Now, Donald Tusk, he's the Prime Minister of Poland, he has said that Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, is going to convene a summit of European leaders in London this Sunday. That, of course, follows the Prime Minister's visit to the United States, meeting with Donald Trump on Thursday.
So presumably Keir Starmer will be talking about the hike in defence spending and perhaps trying to suggest to other nations that they do the same.
Of course, this follows a summit in Paris last week where there was an inconclusive conclusion on whether or not European countries would commit troops to Ukraine to guarantee security. But we saw yesterday Emmanuel Macron visited Trump and indeed on Thursday Keir Starmer will visit Trump. Might we now see a more clear picture of where Europe is headed, and could it be decided in London this Sunday with this summit hosted by the Prime Minister?
Yeah, he'll have lots to report back from his visit with Donald Trump. I imagine they'll be talking a lot about defence, Ukraine and everything else, so it could be an interesting one. So there's the breaking news, a summit of European leaders in London this Sunday.
Well, all that to digest and so much more. Remember, gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved with all of the topics that we're talking about today, particularly what is your view on cutting foreign aid to boost defence spending? Does it sound like a winner in your book? We're going to be discussing it all, far more, including with a Cabinet Minister after your weather.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good afternoon. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Eventually we'll see daytime showers easing overnight, but that means clear skies, so turning chilly, we're likely to see a frost. But a different story in the west, turning wet and windy as this next frontal system starts to push its way eastwards. And we will start to see some showers continue for a time, particularly across the far northwest, where once again the odd shower may be heavy. But elsewhere, these largely easing away, leaving a dry night. But that means plenty of clear skies, particularly across eastern areas. Those temperatures soon dipping away and likely to see a frost, particularly across the northeast of Scotland, but turning very wet and windy across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales, parts of Devon and Cornwall. We could actually see some quite heavy downpours by the time we reach the morning. So a wet start across parts of the southwest, parts of Wales, eventually moving into central areas and parts of the southeast through the morning. Some heavy downpours and turning quite blustery for a time too. Starting to turn quite wet across Northern Ireland, northwestern parts of England and Scotland too. Outbreaks of rain here, perhaps even seeing some snow skirt its way across the Pennines. This mainly confined to hills, but a brighter start across the far north and northeastern part of Scotland, but chilly, likely seeing some frost. And it's here where we'll see the brightest of the conditions. Any rain elsewhere slowly shifting its way eastwards, still heavy and persistent at times, turning a little bit brighter once this clears through, but still plenty of showers behind it, once again with a risk of hail and possibly some thunder. The driest of the weather across the far north of Scotland, and temperatures will be a slight touch down compared to what they were today, highs only reaching around 6 to 7 Celsius across Scotland. Through into the evening, any rain eventually clearing away. Still plenty of blustery showers, though, to start off the evening. And then eventually, as high pressure builds, these showers will ease away, leading to a largely dry night. And staying largely dry for the rest of the week and beginning of the weekend. Away from the far northwest, though, will eventually once again turn wet and windy.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to be one of 2 big winners in our latest Great British giveaway, as we have 2 prize bundles that have to be won. There's 2 lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16, along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. Hurry, lines close on the 7th of March. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Tuesday, the 25th of February. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Tyrants like Putin only respond to strength. Those are the words of the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, as he announced defence spending will be increased to 2.5% of GDP by 2027.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War.
He appeared to claim that this increase will mean an extra £13.4 billion a year on defence, but we're going to have a little look at those figures for you.
And bad news for Brits. Despite Ed Miliband's pledge to cut your bills, energy prices are unexpectedly up again. From April, the price cap will spike by another £111 for the average family.
Well, there you go. A big day. You've got energy prices on the up. You've got defence spending on the up, paid for, apparently, by slashing the foreign aid budget.
But, of course, there are some question marks to be asked about this number. Very clearly, in the House of Commons, the Prime Minister said it's going to go up by £13.4 billion each and every year from 2027. That would represent a 25% increase on the defence budget for the last year we have numbers, which is 23-24. So, I mean, if that's going to be commensurate with the rise from 2.3% to 2.5% of GDP, either they're expecting a lot of inflation, or they're expecting, rapid economic growth, or the Prime Minister misspoke and it's not actually that much extra every year, it's a little bit less.
Well, so we've been told for years, haven't we, that foreign aid is absolutely essential for our soft power, absolutely essential for our security and also, a moral good. But surely this is admittance that actually it's not essential. It's a nice to have. It's a nice to have. If they can cut it for defence, could they have cut it for other things? Pensioners, for example, winter fuel payments, not taxing the farmers. People talk about the foreign aid that's spent on farming communities elsewhere around the world. Yeah. What about ours?
No, I mean, I think there has been a wrestle within the Labour Party over this issue. You've got the sort of more traditional blue Labour types who have always argued that the foreign aid budget should be cut more, and it seems like their voices have won out over the Prime Minister. I have to say...
Or is it that he was just too worried about cutting any other department?
I think that's probably part of it. I also think that the electoral arithmetic as things stand, where various parties are in the polls right now, has clearly played into this decision from Number 10.
Yes, it is a bit of a reform policy, is it not, to cut foreign aid, and probably also a Conservative one, at least in theory. gbnews.com/your say your thoughts on this big move to up the defence spending paid for by a slash in foreign aid. That's after your headlines with Sam.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. It's just after 2 o'clock. Well, as we've been covering in the last couple of hours, Sir Keir Starmer has made that major announcement to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027. He's calling it the biggest sustained increase since the Cold War. But to fund it, the aid budget will be slashed from 0.5% to 0.3% of national income, sparking backlash from charities who warn of devastating consequences. And in the last few minutes, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has disputed Starmer's claim that defence will rise by £13.4 billion a year, saying the true increase is closer to £6 billion. The IFS is warning that if defence spending does go beyond 2.5%, further cuts or tax rises may be needed. But the Prime Minister says the move is needed to counter Vladimir Putin and uncertainty over US support ahead of talks with Donald Trump earlier this week.
Starting today, I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Yeah. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so that we reach that level in 2027. Yeah. And we will maintain that for the rest of this Parliament.
In other news, energy bills are set to rise once again, with Ofgem confirming a higher than expected increase of more than £100 a year from April. The 6.4% hike will push annual bills for a typical household to £1,849, affecting 22 million homes. The regulator says rising wholesale costs are to blame and suggests customers should consider fixing tariffs. But prices could fall again in July. Standing charges are also going up for gas, and consumer groups warn the increase will hit struggling families hard. The government, though, says it is extending help, with nearly 3 million more households set to get support with their energy bills next winter. Those proposals would expand the Warm Homes discount, offering £150 to 2.7 million extra homes, including nearly 1 million with children. The government says the plans will ease the impact of gas price spikes and also working with Ofgem on a potential relief scheme for those in debt. Well, the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, says expanding the discount will help protect millions of families. But the Deputy Leader of the Lib Dems, Daisy Cooper, told us vulnerable households can't afford to wait until next winter.
The government should scrap the energy price bill increase for the almost 10 million pensioners who have had their winter fuel payments taken away. We know from our own research that 9 in 10 people who are worried about energy bills have already changed their behaviour to try and keep their heating costs down. And now people are choosing between heating and eating. So we want the government to take action, not next winter, but right now.
Members of an organised criminal gang have been convicted of forcing migrants into working in cannabis farms across England. The gang smuggled dozens of Vietnamese nationals into the UK on small boats and in the back of lorries. The migrants were then made to work on illegal drug farms in often squalid conditions to pay off their debts to the smuggling gangs. Our Home and Security editor Mark White has the details.
On a residential street in Hartlepool, police forced their way into a suspected cannabis farm.
I know you don't fully understand me, but we'll get a translator as soon as possible, OK?
Arresting a Vietnamese man looking after this criminal enterprise. Within seconds, officers find the first room with dozens of immature plants.
Wow.
Right next door, another room stuffed full of plants. The stench of cannabis is overwhelming.
Oh, wow.
This is just one of dozens of cannabis farms in the West Midlands, Derbyshire, Cheshire, Teesside and London that National Crime Agency investigators identified as they smashed a criminal racket of enforced labour.
Listen to me. At this time, you're under arrest for cultivation of cannabis.
This is one of those gang members, Tazwar Hussain, outside a cannabis farm in East London. 4 Vietnamese nationals were found inside. Like so many others, they'd been smuggled into the UK and forced to pay off their debt to the traffickers by working in the farms for little to no money. The 6 members of this gang, who exploited and threatened dozens of migrants to work for them, will be sentenced in July. Mark White, GB News.
And just before I hand you back to Tom and Emily, the BBC has this afternoon issued a public apology after a review revealed missed opportunities to address concerns over the former Radio 1 DJ Tim Westwood's conduct. While the report found no widespread knowledge of serious allegations, the broadcaster did admit it fell short of its values, apologising to those affected and promising changes to prevent future failures. Westwood, who strongly denies all allegations, was accused of creating a toxic work environment during his time at the broadcaster. The £3.3 million review also outlines steps the BBC says it has already taken to tackle bullying and harassment. That's the news on GB News. I'll be back with you for one more roundup at 2:30. Now, though, over to Tom and Emily.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
OK, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 2 and the developing story today, the Prime Minister, he slashed the aid budget to fund the biggest boost to defence spending since the Cold War.
Well, speaking in the Commons earlier today, Sir Keir Starmer announced spending on defence would rise from its current 2.3% share of GDP to 2.5% in 2027.
Now, there's been a bit of a slight confusion, hasn't there, over exactly how much more money this means every year will be spent on defence. Keir Starmer appeared to say it's £13.4 billion every year more, and he calls some of these very difficult and painful choices. But is it that?
Indeed, the Institute for Fiscal Studies put out a review not so long ago saying that a 0.2% increase would be £6 billion, not £13.4 billion. So what on earth was the Prime Minister saying? Well, let's hear from him, from what he said just an hour or so ago.
Starting today, I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. Yeah. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027. We will cut our spending on development assistance, moving from 0.5% of GNI today to 0.3% in 2027.
Well, let's try and make sense of this now. Go straight to Downing Street and speak to GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Because, Christopher, were defence spending actually going to rise by £13.4 billion every single year? That would be a 25% increase in the defence budget. That would be a bit more than the 0.2% of GDP that the Prime Minister spoke about. What do we know about what was going on in the Prime Minister's head? What do we know about these numbers that seem deeply confusing?
Yes, I'm just trying to work it out now with number 10, and they're sending me various messages as we speak. If you look at the aid budget for 2026 is worth 13.7 billion, and it looks like the PM was saying that by cutting it from 0.5% to 0.3%, it would save that much per year. So I'm trying to get some explanation from number 10. Either way, if you step back from the detail of the numbers, and we'll get that worked out for GB News viewers as soon as possible, he is doing what he said he would do when he became into Prime Minister. He is putting country before party. A lot on the left are very annoyed and angry about cutting aid spending and spending it on weapons, turning ploughshares into weapons, if you like. It's what he said. He is putting the country's interest ahead of where he may want to be politically. He said he won't pretend otherwise. This is a cut in the aid budget. It's a very difficult decision he's taken on aid, but I think that is required. What has completely changed since Donald Trump became leader of the free world, the US president, is the way we treat this from now on. It's very important that we handle the Ukraine issue on our own, in a sense, we're not relying entirely on US support. What's also extremely interesting is where these policies may have come from. Now, this will be probably denied by the Prime Minister, but if you look back at Reform UK's manifesto back in July this year, they said they wanted to increase defence spending to 2.5% in year 3 of a reform government, World War to be established by 2027, and then to 3% after 6 years, 2030. Now, all the PM is doing is having a second target till 2035. So it is extraordinary here. You have a Labour government taking reform policies to deal with a big crisis in defence spending. I mean, yet again we are seeing, I think, how Nigel Farage, with 5 MPs, 4 million votes in the last election, is moving the dial in British politics, and I'm sure that would be denied by Number 10, but that's how it seems.
Quite possibly, and also the influence of Donald Trump breathing down Keir Starmer's neck, I'm sure, as well. But Christopher, it's interesting that this announcement, which will be seen as a positive one to many people in this country, comes on the day that we've had a rather negative headline about energy bills.
Yes, that's right. It was hinted at last week by Ed Miliband, the energy cap going up by £100 or so, I think it is. That they were warned that was coming. Luckily, it's feeling more like spring in Westminster than winter, and people might be turning their heating down. But yet again, that draws into question the policy of this government. Don't forget they won power last July saying they would cut energy bills by £300 by the next election. Well, they're going up, not down, and many are critical of the way the issues with North Sea oil licences and not using the oil and gas that we control as a country, and instead going down this green route. But as things stand, that's the progress they're making. But lots of complaints about that, and £100 on the energy price cap will not help them at all with making that case.
A good day to bury bad news, as the infamous saying once uttered in those walls behind you once went.
I think to be fair, to be fair to them, Tom, the off-gen price cap was always going to be announced today, and of course he flies tomorrow to America to see Donald Trump. So I think yes, it may look that way, but I think the two things are separate.
Christopher, you're always fair. Thank you very much indeed. Christopher Hope, outside Downing Street for us.
And we'll hope that Christopher can continue badgering away at Number 10 for the actual numbers here.
Yeah, they got it wrong. I mean, it's over the course of the Parliament.
The maths doesn't work. The Prime Minister misspoke, or they're expecting some crazy economic growth between now and 2027.
Well, I mean, let's hope it's the latter, but I sincerely doubt it.
Yeah, well, Mark White, our security editor, is with us because let's avoid the particulars and get to the broader picture here. The armed forces have been crying out for this for many, many years.
Yes, because what you've had really ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War is this so-called peace dividend, which has allowed government after government to cash in on what they say is a much more benign environment internationally, and we don't need the same level of defence commitment that we've had previously. So government after government has just cut away slowly but surely at the defence budget to prioritise other domestic issues. And that's really led to some very significant capability gaps and huge structural issues within the Ministry of Defence. So even with this increase now being announced from 2007 to 2.5% of GDP, yes, it will be worth at least, I think, £6 or £7 billion a year. That's hardly going to touch the sides, I think, to be honest, for a year or two to get over the very deep and structural issues that the department has. If we get to the point, as Keir Starmer has seemingly committed to thereof in the next Parliament, a Labour government would commit to rising to 3% of GDP, that is actually an enormous rise in defence funding, because at the moment we're talking about a 0.2% rise, which equates to about £6 or £7 billion extra a year. Well, if you're going on top of that another 0.5% rise, it is very big indeed in terms of the money that will suddenly be available to the Ministry of Defence. And what you don't want to do is suddenly give all that money to a hopelessly wasteful department like the Ministry of Defence, which has been embroiled in scandal after scandal over the years with procurement programmes that have vastly overrun, such as the Nimrod maritime reconnaissance aircraft programme that cost many, many hundreds of millions of pounds in overruns. It was never coming to fruition and was, of course, scrapped by David Cameron's coalition government in 2010. We got the current Ajax fighting vehicle programme replacing the Warrior fighting vehicle. That, again, is a £5.5 billion programme that's had many, many years of overruns. It was first committed to in 2010, was supposed to come on stream in 2017. It's still not on stream yet and won't reach operational capability, full operational capability, until at least 2028. And as I say, that's been beset by problems. So it sounds great, more money for the military once they sort out the sort of structural issues they have. But we can't have a repeat of the way in which the MOD has gone for procurement programmes, big ticket defence spending that has just continually been, plagued by delays and overruns and big increases in the budget.
Well, like any department of government, there's a lot of waste, inefficiencies and bad decisions when it comes to procurement.
It's not just that. I mean, I think the admirals and the generals also have to take their fair share of the blame here, because what often happens is, a procurement programme, an armament programme, a decision to buy an aircraft type or a ship is agreed to, and then through the life of that process of designing and then building the ship, there's kind of interference from the chiefs about we want this and we want that amendment, we should have this capability. And then what happens then is you just get a very significant cost overrun, and you can talk about actually double, treble the initial budget for some of these programmes.
Well, hopefully this is good for morale as well in our armed forces. A bit of appreciation of how important they are. Perhaps Mark White will have to leave it.
Just very interesting. The government, the Prime Minister, did announce a defence reform and efficiency plan, very sort of Elon Musk-like. So let's see if it actually makes any difference to the way the MOD operates.
Well, hopefully so. But why don't we move on now and see, of course, the situation with our energy bills yet to rise again today. More than 100 quid per year from April.
Yeah, another 100 quid. During the election campaign, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband repeatedly promised, didn't he, that his policies would save families £300 on their energy bills.
Only Labour offers a plan for real change to cut energy bills for good with GB Energy, our new publicly owned energy company.
But since he took office, there have been not one, not two, but 3 energy price rises.
Well, let's discuss this further with the consumer journalist Harry Wallop. Harry, sorry to bring your name into this, but consumers are going to be feeling a bit walloped today.
Yeah, understandably, they will be very upset because we were expecting another price rise to come in on the 1st of April, about 5%. It's now, in fact, going to be 6.4% for a typical user. That doesn't sound much of a difference, but it does equate to an awful lot because, of course, energy bills are very, very expensive. So a typical household will now be paying from April £1,849, so £111 more. And just to put this into context, we are paying now 600 quid a year more than when Russia invaded Ukraine. So we are just in a whole new world of higher energy bills.
And Harry, if you don't fancy paying all this extra on your energy bills, or you simply can't afford it, what options are there for you?
Well, I mean, the good news is that actually finally in the last 6 months or so, the energy market has become competitive once again after a few years where it was just pointless switching because everyone's cheapest bill was the energy cap. So that's what you ended up paying. Now, there are plenty of deals out there that are cheaper than the current energy cap. And that's before we get into the 6.4% rise that's going to happen in April. So I would urge everyone who is not already on a fixed bill, and that is about 2/3 of households, shop around. Go online, go into any of those search engines that do look at different energy bills, and you will find out whether you can get a better deal? And the answer is you should be able to do so.
Now, Harry, there are some services that allow for automatic switching, so you don't even need to think about it. I suppose these systems also take a slice of it too. Are they worth your time? Are they worth your money?
Yeah, absolutely. Because obviously, you know, some people have very busy lives. It can be quite confusing. If you sign up to one of these automatic switches, completely, it's very worthwhile. Of course, the switching services take a cut. That's how they make their money. But you're still going to be saving money. I mean, I wouldn't feel resentful that there's a middleman taking a small slice, because that's how the market operates. And if they're putting a good deal in front of you, obviously they get a small percentage of getting a new customer to that provider. But yeah, you shop around, you will find that there are some deals out there before the April rise comes in. I mean, confusingly, we are expecting, hopefully, that the next price cap, which is July, it might come down a little bit. But if it comes down a little bit, it won't actually be any lower than we are now. It'll probably be higher than when we are now. As I say, you can find deals out there at the moment which are cheaper than the current energy price.
And Harry, are these smart readers worth having?
Well, I mean, I think they're mostly a bit of a waste of time in that they're not that smart, but they're useful for all sorts of people. The one thing they're very good at is giving you an update on an hourly basis of how much energy you're using. What they're not smart about is telling you, well, it's the toaster, or it's the hairdryer, or it's that bath that your teenage daughter's just run that sent your bill higher. You need to kind of work that out. And frankly, they're not that smart at automatically sort of switching on to a better deal. But they're useful information, and they don't cost any more than your standard old, your old meter.
I think it's spot on. I think they promote tyranny in the household.
No.
I remember when my father got one for the first time. Oh, you've had that light on for too long. I could see it. I could see it on the smart reader.
Although if you're with some of these companies, they actually let you have energy for free at certain points of the day when there's over generation, and sort of if you have your toaster on, or you boil your kettle at 2 a.m. and you're actually making money.
Sometimes we have too much information. Harry Wallop, thank you so much. Really useful to get your perspective on all of this, consumer journalist. So there you go. It is worth shopping around.
Well, there you go. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come on today's programme. Indeed, we're going to quiz the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, well, very senior Cabinet Minister Pat McFadden, after this very short break. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
It's also about how children are taught to behave towards people who claim that they have a different gender to their biological sex. And what I'm really concerned about is particularly girls being told that they shouldn't challenge, say, a man in their changing rooms or a boy in their toilets because that is unkind. Joanne, do you think that's actually setting up girls to put themselves in danger for the so-called purpose of being kind?
Again, what you're doing here is you're using these very obtuse type comments to try and paint trans people as some sort of predators and going
I'm
into
trying to
changing
say
rooms.
that there's a reason that we have single-sex spaces, and if girls are socially conditioned not to uphold those single-sex spaces, we are going to have a huge safeguarding challenge.
So it's important that the education we're providing around gender identity, even non-trans people, about understanding your sense of self, I think is really important. I think schools today are doing a far better job than they did when I was younger in the 60s. So I'm not an education profession specialist in this area, but I would advocate that education needs to represent the real world, and trans people are in the real world. If it means making girls more aware of their own sense of self, empowering them, giving them, working with them to...
Helen,
so
how is this empowering girls?
Say again?
I just said, moving on to Helen, how is this empowering girls?
This language of empowerment is not the right starting point when you're talking with children. Adults and children have totally different duties and responsibilities and rights and needs. In schools, it's up to the grown-ups to set rules that keep everybody safe. It's not possible to keep everybody safe if you pretend that some boys can be girls and some girls can be boys. That doesn't mean being mean or unkind.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 28 minutes past 2, and we're digesting what was not only a military statement from the Prime Minister, but a deeply political one too. Two halves of it: increasing spending on defence to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, up to 3% in the next Parliament, or so he says, although we don't know how that's going to be funded yet. But more crucially than that, how is the uplift to 2.5 going to be funded? Cutting foreign aid.
Yeah, I almost can't believe that Sir Keir Starmer, the great international-minded lawyer, thought that he would actually ever cut foreign aid. It is quite a statement from Keir Starmer, quite a backtracking, isn't it, from past positions?
It is, but of course the Prime Minister's been very happy to backtrack from past positions on just about every other issue under the sun. Of course, first he was in favour of free movement of people with Europe, then he was against it. First he was in favour of free tuition fees, then he was against it. First he wanted to nationalise mail and energy and all the utilities, and then he didn't want to nationalise them and instead create one fake company. First, the leader of the Labour Party said that he would campaign against deportation flights, and now he's advertising how many deportation flights he's sending off. I mean, is there anything that this man actually believes?
Yeah, does he actually stand for anything sincerely? Because he seems to move with the wind.
Winning.
Winning. Yeah, is it just about that? Is it just about having power? It seems that way. It seems that way. Yes, lots of you getting in touch to point out that Labour have complained about foreign aid cuts to a great extent, many a time in the past when the Tories have done it or thought about doing it.
In 2021, Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister, announced the first foreign aid cut for, I think it was 30 years. And Keir Starmer stood up there and he said, every living former Prime Minister disagrees with this man, with this cut. There's a cross-party consensus that foreign aid is absolutely necessary in this world. We've maintained this consensus for decades. How dare he? How dare he cut foreign aid? And now the shoe's on the other foot.
Yeah, also, some of you getting in touch to say, Carol's getting in touch about how, how we decide our defence spending. Why do we do it, according to our GDP rather than just simply an amount per year? Because, of course, GDP does go up and down. Why do we use these kind of targets?
I think it's because if you don't do a target like that sort of has inbuilt growth, politicians like to sort of leave spending where it is.
Allow inflation
and
to
allow inflation to whittle it down.
Yeah.
That's what we do see in some departments. Real terms freezes, which of course... it's cash terms freezes, which of course means real term cuts. I think the key thing about pegging it to a measure that ordinarily you would expect to grow, obviously in the last couple of years, it hasn't so much. But let's get straight to the details now. Delighted to be joined by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, one of the most senior men in the Cabinet, Pat McFadden. Pat, this is a bold move from the Prime Minister. Firstly, how does this cut to foreign aid align with what the Prime Minister said when he was Leader of the Opposition? Back in 2021, he admonished Boris Johnson for precisely the same move.
Look, it's not a decision that we took lightly. We appreciate the importance of foreign aid, the soft power, as people say, of these programmes around the world, as well as the humanitarian instinct behind them. But the truth is we have a very difficult defence context now in Europe, and it's changed a lot in recent years, and it's changed a lot in the last month. And it's important that the government fulfills its first duty, which is to protect its people, and that it responds to the changed context. This debate around 2.5% of GDP on defence has been around for a long time, as you and your viewers will know, and we decided in the context of quite a changed view of European security that this was the moment where, instead of committing to this in general terms, we had to commit to it in specific terms, with both a timetable and a means of funding it.
Yeah, is the Labour Party here, the Labour government, copying the Reform Party on this one? They wanted to up defence spending and pay for it through cuts to foreign aid.
Well, I would remind you that the Labour Party were the co-founders of NATO. Ernest Bevin, just after the Second World War, along with President Harry Truman, George Marshall. This was, in many ways, a joint British-American effort where the Labour government at the time played a big role. I would also remind you and your viewers that the last time defence expenditure was at 2.5% of GDP was when Labour were in power. The Tories were in power for 14 years, talked about it, didn't do it. In recent years, this has only happened under Labour governments. Our commitment to defence is not new. It is a big part of our history and our tradition, and something that we're very proud of.
OK, Pat McFadden, you said that you want to stop talking in the generality and move to the specific. So let's move to the specific here. Let's move to the numbers. I want you to listen back to what the Prime Minister told the House of Commons a little bit earlier this afternoon. He said that defence spending would be raised by £13.4 billion each and every year. So if it's going to be each and every year, let's listen back to that, to what he said in the comments.
And let me spell that out, Mr. Speaker. That means spending £13.4 billion more on defence every year from 2027.
Is it actually every year, Pat McFadden? Because that would be a 25% increase in defence spending. That would take away the entire foreign aid budget, not just 0.2% of it.
It will be that in cash terms, because within that there'll be some increase in defence spending anyway as a result of the growing economy. And when you add a greater proportion of that growing economy, that's when you get to an extra £13 billion. So it will be that. It's a substantial increase, and it's important that we use it well.
OK, wait. Let's just dive into this. So is this including inflation, GDP growth that you expected? Is this also including the security services that are going to be counted now in the defence budget, which we haven't counted, well, in the history of the defence budget, including MI5, MI6, the rest of the GCHQ sort of spy network?
By the end of the period, they will be included, but that takes us to 2.6%. That actually takes you over the 2.5% when you include that intelligence and security work to which you referred. And the reason we're doing that is it's in line with NATO practice. Quite a lot of other countries do it. So at the same time as doing this move, it makes sense to count what is included in the same way as other countries do.
Yeah, our viewers are just a bit confused because £13.4 billion per year, that's the equivalent to practically all of the foreign aid budget, what we spend in a year per year on foreign aid as it stands. So it can't really work mathematically.
It can when you take into account the fact that the economy is going to be growing in size over these years as well.
Well, that's not a given, is it?
Put the two together, that's where you get to that figure. That's the projections from the OBR, and when you put the two together, that's when you get to that figure. OK, so that actually
bakes in some pretty high inflation that the OBR was expecting as well. That, I suppose, makes a great deal of sense. But, Pat McFadden, is this exactly what the Prime Minister wanted to do? Or has the UK been bounced into this ahead of a pretty important meeting with Donald Trump on Thursday?
There's no doubt that the international context has changed with the election of President Trump. There's no point in denying that. But this is not an announcement for 1 week or for one meeting. This is an announcement for Britain's security interests for many, many years to come. And the reason we're doing it is partly because of what we've seen in Europe over the last few years, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. As the Prime Minister said, the idea of Russian tanks once again rolling through European cities in a way that at the end of the Cold War we thought we wouldn't see again. But we have seen in recent years. But also the election of President Trump has put a new context into this, in the sense that the assumptions that people have made about being able to rely on an American security umbrella can't be seen in the same way as they were before. He's been very clear about that, and the government has a duty to respond to the international situation in which we find ourselves. Modern warfare has changed, the demands on defence have changed, and the geopolitics have changed, and our duty in those circumstances is to protect the British people, and that's what this announcement today will do.
OK, now Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, will be meeting with Donald Trump, as you say, and he'll be able to tell him that we're boosting defence spending, as Donald Trump has demanded many a time, on many an occasion. What will Keir Starmer ask from Donald Trump?
Well, it's an important meeting. I'm sure they'll cover lots of areas. I think when it comes to Ukraine, he will be saying we don't just want fighting to stop, we want a lasting and enduring peace with security guarantees for Ukraine, so that this just doesn't start up again in a year or two, or whenever the Russians decide to regroup. And I think they'll have a lot of really important discussions about that issue, about security, about other issues too. This is an important meeting, and the Prime Minister has taken it very seriously, as he should, and he's looking forward to meeting the new President, not for the first time, but for the first time since he became President.
Of course, the Prime Minister said in his statement that he refused to make the choice between Europe and the United States, that he wants to act as this bridge. Does that rule out the perhaps hopes of many in your party that there would be a Love Actually moment in the White House on Thursday, where the Prime Minister took a stronger stand against the President of the United States and some of the fruitier things that he's said about President Zelensky being a dictator, about Ukraine being responsible for their own invasion? Might we hear the Prime Minister stand up for decency and democracy a bit more than he has so far when he visits the President?
This thing about not choosing is really important, because it's not in the national interest to choose. We have a massively important relationship with European countries in trade, in geography and in security. And that's a big part of today's announcement. So we won't be forced into a choice. We value our friendship with the United States. We value our defence and security cooperation with the United States. But we also value our relationships with Europe. And it's in the British interest not to be forced into that choice, and that's why he said that in the Commons today.
But Pat, you didn't answer the question. Why aren't we going to hear perhaps a stronger tone from the Prime Minister? Might we see yet again the accusation that this is a more poodling relationship? Of course, we saw the French President yesterday in the White House contradict Donald Trump, say things about French spending on Ukraine, French aid to Ukraine that wasn't reciprocal in the way that Donald Trump suggested it was. It seems that in some ways Emmanuel Macron has seemed a stronger figure than our own Prime Minister in the last couple of weeks.
Well, the Prime Minister will always stick up for British interests. The Prime Minister will always tell the truth, and none of us know exactly what we'll see in this meeting on Thursday. What we do know is the British Prime Minister is taking it very seriously, as he should, and that whatever he says and does in the United States will be in the British national interest. That's what people should expect from the British Prime Minister, and that's what they'll get.
OK, Pat McFadden, thank you very much indeed, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster there.
Thank you.
Now, of course, we'll see the upsum from all of that on Sunday. At least that's according to Donald Tusk, the Polish president, who is suggesting there will be a summit in London following all of these American meetings.
Yes, what will come out of that? But if you're in search of a getaway, some winter sun, here's the forecast.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
If you're heading away for some winter sun through this week, there will be some fine weather around across parts of the Mediterranean, but currently around the eastern Med it's still fairly unsettled. Some heavy rain, some strong winds and temperatures well below average for the time of year, but these are gradually going to be lifting. Further west, a drier story across many parts of, well, France and Spain, but there is some wet weather starting to push its way in as we go later on this week. Otherwise, some decent sunshine on offer. See you later.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hello there, good morning. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Cloudier start across the southeast this morning, but eventually any rain easing away, leading to a day of sunny spells and showers, though some of these could be quite heavy and thundery at times, particularly across the far northwest where we'll see the bulk of the showers through this afternoon, and then any rain eventually easing away across the southeast, particularly across parts of Sussex and Kent, but leading to a brighter afternoon. And on the whole, it should be a relatively bright afternoon for most of us with plenty of sunny spells, though keep your raincoat handy. Still some showers bubbling up through the afternoon, particularly across the far northwest where we'll see the most frequent and intense showers with a risk of hail and thunder. And temperatures a slight dip compared to yesterday, but still above average for the time of year. Highs of around 10 to 11 Celsius across the far south. To end the day across Scotland, still plenty of these showers feeding through, still heavy at times with a risk of hail and thunder, perhaps even bringing some snow across the Scottish Highlands. Largely dry across Aberdeenshire though. Plenty of showers skirting through across Northern Ireland, northwestern parts of England, and perhaps a few still lingering on across parts of England and Wales too, but eventually easing away, leading to a drier night, particularly across eastern areas. And with clear skies, temperatures will soon dip away, likely leading to a frost by the morning, but a different story in western areas. We'll see something slightly milder moving through and some outbreaks of rain starting to move in through here too, particularly across Northern Ireland, parts of Wales, parts of Devon and Cornwall by the morning too. This could be a little bit heavy and also quite blustery at times. So a bit of a westy split in the weather by the time we reach the morning, but any outbreaks of rain slowly shifting their way eastwards through the afternoon, perhaps turning a little bit brighter behind, but still can't rule out some showers, particularly once again across far western parts of Scotland, where here too it could be a little bit blustery, and temperatures fairly similar today, but perhaps a little bit chillier across Scotland. Highs of only 6 to 7 Celsius here. Bye-bye.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2:45. Now a blow to Brits today as energy bills are set to rise yet again, this time by more than £100 a year from April.
Yes, and during the election campaign, you might remember, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband repeatedly promised that his policies would be the ones to save families £300 on their energy bills.
But of course, since Miliband took office, there have been not one, not two, but 3 energy price rises. OK,
well, let's get the thoughts of the energy consultant, Catherine Porter. Catherine, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Catherine, Ed Miliband has responded to these price hikes, and he says this is all due to our reliance on fossil fuels, and that when GB Energy kicks in and we invest more in renewables, it will all be OK and we'll be saving huge amounts.
Yeah, unfortunately, we'll be paying even more. And it's interesting that there's a consultation out at the moment on the subsidy regime for new wind farms, which very much suggests that the prices for that are going to go up. And they're talking about extending the duration of these subsidies from 15 to 20 years, which is most of the life of these plants. So it's very much not the case that renewables are making bills cheaper or will make bills cheaper. The opposite is true. Renewables are responsible for driving bills higher.
I mean, Ed Miliband will say to that, no, 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 listen to me, renewables are the cheapest form of energy, and if only we invest more in that, we can forget about the gas, we can forget about all the nasty fossil fuels and live the eco-dream. Is he wrong?
Yes. Wind farms have a load factor of about 35%. So that basically means they're only working 35% of the time. So then you have to pay for other stuff to be available in the rest of the time. They have low energy density. An 800 megawatt gas power station needs one grid connection. An equivalent sized wind farm needs 65 wind turbines, all of which need to be connected. Wind is variable from moment to moment, and that causes the grid to be harder to manage, so balancing costs have gone up by billions of pounds a year. It's just simply not true to say that renewables will make electricity cheaper. Now, what they do is reduce the wholesale price, but the way we subsidise renewables is that after the wholesale price, extra things are added onto the bill, including the contract for difference. And under the contract for difference, wind farms get paid the difference between the strike price and the wholesale price. So if the wholesale price falls, the amount they receive under the contract for difference goes up by the exact same amount.
So these are the contracts for difference are the contracts that the government has agreed with these renewable energy companies to pay a specific price, no matter how much the international prices are. It's sort of like a futures market.
Yeah, it's effectively the government provides their hedge for them. And so they cunningly quote these prices in 2012 money to make them look cheap. But when you inflate them up to today's money, they're not cheap at all. And, you know, the most recent ones have been the same or higher, depending on the technology of current electricity prices. And obviously electricity prices are variable as well. So there's an expectation that the next round, as I was saying, is going to be much higher. We're seeing, you know, the government has this plan to build a lot more wind in a very short space of time. And the only real way to achieve that is by throwing money at it. But the other terrible thing about all of this is the more recent wind farms that have connected, such as Sea Green, are being paid more money for curtailment than they're being paid to generate electricity.
Right.
So we're deliberately building wind farms when we know we cannot deliver the electricity they generate to consumers. So consumers have to pay twice. They pay the gas power station that has to fire up to deliver electricity to them, and then they have to pay a curtailment fee for the wind farm that was told to turn down because of congestion on the grid. This is all very expensive for consumers, and it's a driving factor behind bills.
Yeah, I mean, we're just paying so much for energy in this country, so much compared to other nations. I mean, does Ed Miliband have any redeeming features in your book?
I'm struggling to think of any. I mean, I think his biggest flaw is that he seems completely unwilling to listen to anybody that doesn't share his rather zealous views about wind and solar. There have been studies that show that the UK is one of the worst places on earth to build solar farms, and yet he's handing over prime agricultural land to put more solar panels. And the wind and solar equipment that he's so keen on is all coming from China. Most of our gas that we don't produce ourselves comes from Norway. So when he's talking about cutting reliance on dictators, well, I think the idea that Norwegians are dictators is a pretty niche view. But having reliance on China for all of these things is obviously embedding a bigger reliance on dictators.
OK, well, Catherine Porter, energy consultant, really appreciate your thoughts and indeed your analysis on this pressing issue.
Well, what a news day it's been. Let's finish with a shocking story you may not have seen. A long-serving primary school teacher has been sacked after 35 years because a joke in class backfired.
Yes, the teacher in question told pupils she'd whack them if they didn't hold their test papers properly.
But one child who spoke English as a second language didn't get the joke, and now a tribunal has ruled her dismissal was fair after 35 years. Well, joining us now to discuss this is author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. Christine, we've been sent lots of messages from people saying how in the past they used to have the the board rubber chucked at them and the ruler over their hand. I mean, what's going on in our schools? Can't take a joke now.
Well, you may well ask. I mean, if that last item you've shown hadn't deeply depressed me, which it does, Ed Miliband, this one really does. I mean, there is a teacher, as you said, 35 years experience, towards the end of her career. Her pension will be massively impacted by this. It was a joke. The rest of the class got it. There's one boy, English not the first language, didn't get it, but he said he was very angry, felt threatened, and he was upset. But he still stayed in the school. So it can't have been that bad, can it? And the judge who made this decision, where is his sense of fairness? Good old-fashioned fair play. Yes, in this ridiculous woke age, the teacher probably regrets doing it. A little reprimand would have been fine, but for her to lose her job, what do they want? Do they want us all to be taught by robots or what? And children have to know, they have to learn about banter, about, you know, humorous exchanges, and the sooner they learn, the better.
But also, frankly, about hierarchy.
Yes.
I mean, it's not one boy in the class who gets to determine who teaches him. It's the teacher's classroom. It's the head master or mistress's school. I mean, have we just sort of completely inverted the sense of hierarchy in this country?
Well, yes. I mean, we've lost our heads. This is a nonsense on stilts. It really is. I mean, bring back the days when pupils used to hold the doors open for teachers. They're now told, especially for a female teacher, that it's sexist to do that. So is it any wonder that teachers are leaving the profession and a third quit within 5 years of joining? I mean, what a scandalous waste. We have gone completely stark raving mad. This teacher was guilty of banter, not misconduct. And for her to lose her job, as I said, we will end up being taught by robots if this goes on. It's got to stop, just like Ed Miliband has got to stop with his massive rush to net zero.
I thought you might want to comment on that too. Christine Hamilton, will have to leave it there. Author and broadcaster, of course, and friend of the show. Yes, they all talk about their human rights now, though, don't they? It's my human rights. I'm not going to open the door for you.
Well, I mean, it is.
You've got to earn my respect, they say to the teacher.
Slightly bonkers. I mean, in some ways, we massively infantilise children in a way that we have never done before in this country. You know, in Scotland, you can't be criminally, you can't go to prison for practically any problem until you're 25 because they say your brain's not developed. But then you can vote at the age of 16. I mean, make it make sense.
What's his second language?
Yeah, does that mean that he doesn't perhaps understand the nuances of
maybe that's the issue.
Sarcasm and humour?
Maybe that's the issue, not the teacher that's been in the job for 35 years. Anyway, that's the state of modern Britain. There you go. Sorry to leave on a depressing note.
Well, to cheer you up.
Us. Yeah, go on then.
Yeah, to cheer you up, Martin is next. Sorry for the depressing show, but you know what? We'll see you tomorrow at 12.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good afternoon. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Eventually we'll see daytime showers easing overnight, but that means clear skies, so turning chilly, we're likely to see a frost. But a different story in the west, turning wet and windy as this next frontal system starts to push its way eastwards. And we will start to see some showers continue for a time, particularly across the far northwest, where once again the odd shower may be heavy. But elsewhere, these largely easing away, leaving a dry night. But that means plenty of clear skies, particularly across eastern areas. Those temperatures soon dipping away and likely to see a frost, particularly across the northeast of Scotland, but turning very wet and windy across parts of Northern Ireland, Wales, parts of Devon and Cornwall. Could actually see some quite heavy downpours by the time we reach the morning. So a wet start across parts of the southwest, parts of Wales, eventually moving into central areas and parts of the southeast through the morning. Some heavy downpours and turning quite blustery for a time too. Starting to turn quite wet across Northern Ireland, northwestern parts of England and Scotland too. Outbreaks of rain here, perhaps even seeing some snow skirt its way across the Pennines. This mainly confined to hills, but a brighter start across the far north and northeastern part of Scotland. But chilly, likely seeing some frost. And it's here where we'll see the brightest of the conditions. Any rain elsewhere slowly shifting its way eastwards, still heavy and persistent at times, turning a little bit brighter once this clears through, but still plenty of showers behind it, once again with a risk of hail and possibly some thunder. The driest of the weather across the far north of Scotland, and temperatures will be a slight touch down compared to what they were today, highs only reaching around 6 to 7 Celsius across Scotland. Through into the evening, any rain eventually clearing away. Still plenty of blustery showers, though, to start off the evening. And then eventually, as high pressure builds, these showers will ease away, leading to a largely dry night and staying largely dry for the rest of the week and beginning of the weekend. Away from the far northwest, though, will eventually once again turn wet and windy.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's just 2 weeks left to grab your chance to be one of 2 big winners in our latest Great British giveaway. First, you'll win a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash to spend however you like. You'll also receive the very latest iPhone 16 and we'll send you on a shopping spree with £500 to spend in your favourite store. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Last week, Christie's Auction House in New York announced that it was holding an auction devoted solely to art created with artificial intelligence. Nearly 6,000 people have signed an open letter calling on Christie's to cancel the sale over concerns that the technology behind such AI art pieces exploits human artists and can potentially violate their copyright. And there are broader ethical questions at play too. Where do the boundaries of art lie? With me now is James Thomas from Martin Stanmore Auctions. James, very good to see you indeed. I don't quite see how you can have art without a human being. I mean, art to me is